What if I told you that beneath our feet, carved into ancient stone, and hidden across every continent lies a truth so profound that it could shatter everything we've been taught about human history? Welcome to Forbidden Fathoms. I'm taking you on a journey into the depths of our forgotten past, where mysteries don't just whisper, they scream for attention. Picture this: sacred geometry etched into temples by people who supposedly had no understanding of advanced mathematics. Pyramids buried beneath the hills of Bosnia that could predate Egypt by thousands of years. The impossible precision of Egyptian megaliths that modern technology struggles to replicate. A hidden pyramid in Indonesia that pushes civilization back 20,000 years. Dozens of concealed pyramids in China, deliberately covered and kept from the world. And that's just the beginning. Across the Americas, lost architects created engineering marvels that align perfectly with the stars, built with techniques we still cannot explain. Ancient civilizations achieved engineering feats so advanced that today's experts stand baffled, unable to recreate them with all our modern tools. And beneath our very feet, entire cities and tunnel networks lie buried, waiting to reveal secrets about cultures we never knew existed. Every stone tells a story. Every structure poses a question. And every discovery challenges the comfortable narrative we've been given about primitive ancestors stumbling through the dark ages of prehistory. Here's the truth: they don't want you to seize our ancestors weren't primitive. They possessed knowledge that we've lost, technology that we're only beginning to understand, and connections across continents that supposedly never happened. From the sacred patterns carved into stone to the massive pyramids hidden under jungles and mountains, from engineering impossibilities to entire civilizations erased from history, the evidence is undeniable. This isn't just about ancient rocks and buried ruins. This is about reclaiming our true heritage. It's about understanding that humanity's story is far more magnificent, far more mysterious, and far more advanced than we've been led to believe. Some call these discoveries controversial. Some call them forbidden. I call them the truth that's been waiting in the shadows, carved in stone, buried underground, and hidden in plain sight for us to finally recognize. Today, we're connecting the dots across 8 profound mysteries that together reveal a pattern so clear, so undeniable, that once you see it, you'll never look at ancient history the same way again. So open your mind, challenge what you think you know, and prepare to descend into the forbidden depths with me, because the greatest adventure isn't discovering new lands, it's seeing the ancient world with new eyes. This is Forbidden Fathoms, and your journey into the truth starts now. If ancient architects possessed knowledge that exceeds what we can explain today, then one question naturally follows: why? Why would civilizations with no modern machinery, no satellites, and no digital measurement tools build structures of such astonishing precision? And more importantly, what were they trying to preserve? This is not a question we can dismiss lightly. The precision we observe in ancient monuments is not approximate. It is not close enough for ancient standards. It is precision that rivals and sometimes exceeds what modern engineering achieves with laser levels, GPS satellites, and computer-aided design. We are not talking about structures that are roughly aligned or approximately geometric. We are talking about measurements accurate to fractions of degrees, proportions maintained across hundreds of meters, and alignments that remain true after millennia of earthquakes and erosion. The deeper we measure these ancient monuments, the clearer the pattern becomes. These massive structures were not random feats of design. They were not built purely for ceremony or spectacle. They were constructed according to identical principles, guided by the same mathematical codes, and shaped by a universal blueprint echoed across continents and across time. Every new survey confirms what previous measurements suggested. Every technological advancement in measurement reveals not errors in ancient construction, but errors in our assumptions about ancient capabilities. Ground-penetrating radar, laser scanning, photogrammetry, and satellite positioning all tell the same story. These monuments were built with intention, knowledge, and precision that demands explanation. No matter where you look: Egypt, Mexico, Peru, China, Indonesia, the same constants reappear. The same ratios, the same alignments, the same numerical signatures carved into stone by cultures we're told developed in isolation. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its slope angle of 51 degrees is not arbitrary. That single angle encodes both the golden ratio and the number pi with astonishing accuracy. When you compare its height to its base circumference, the relationship mirrors the ratio between Earth's radius and its full circumference. The mathematics are precise. The original height of the Great Pyramid was 280 Egyptian royal cubits. The base perimeter measured 1,760 cubits. When you divide the perimeter by twice the height, you get pi to several decimal places. This is not an interpretation. This is measurement. The pyramid's geometry encodes one of mathematics' most fundamental constants, but it doesn't stop there. The golden ratio, phi, appears in the pyramid's cross-section. The ratio of the slant height to half the base length produces phi with remarkable accuracy. This same ratio appears throughout nature in nautilus shells, flower petals, spiral galaxies, and even in the proportions of the human body. The pyramid builders encoded a universal constant that governs growth, harmony, and natural form. That alone is remarkable, but what makes it unsettling is this. Those same proportions appear in pyramids thousands of miles away, built by civilizations separated by oceans and centuries of civilizations that, according to conventional history, never made contact. Yet the math says otherwise. In Teotihuacan, Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun incorporates the same base to height proportions as Giza. The angle of ascent, the relationship between platforms, the overall geometric design all echo principles found in Egyptian architecture. The builders used different materials, different construction techniques, and different cultural symbols. But the underlying mathematics remain consistent. At Chichen Itza, the Castillo pyramid contains 91 steps on each of its 4 sides, totaling 364 steps. Add the top platform, and you have 365, the solar year encoded in architecture. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the sun casts shadows that create the illusion of a serpent descending the pyramid's staircase. This requires precise astronomical knowledge and geometric calculation. The builders knew exactly how light would interact with stone on specific days of the year. In Peru, the precision manifests differently but remains equally remarkable. Machu Picchu's Intihuatana stone casts no shadow at noon during the equinoxes. The stone is carved and positioned with such precision that at the moment of perfect solar alignment, it becomes a sundial that points directly to the zenith. The astronomical knowledge required for this achievement suggests observation spanning centuries and mathematical understanding that conventional history does not accommodate. Even more puzzling is orientation. Many of these monuments align almost perfectly with true or magnetic north, with deviations so small that modern survey equipment only matched them within the last few hundred years. Some pyramids are aligned more precisely than structures built with GPS. The Great Pyramid aligns to true north with an error of only 1/60th of a single degree. This level of precision was not matched by modern architecture until the development of advanced surveying instruments in the 19th century. How did ancient builders achieve this accuracy? They had no magnetic compasses, which point to magnetic north rather than true north anyway. They had no gyroscopic instruments. They had no satellite positioning. Yet they achieved alignment that modern builders struggle to replicate. How could ancient builders achieve this? And why was alignment so important? The answer may lie in what alignment represents. True north is a constant. It doesn't shift with seasons or local magnetic variations. Aligning to true north creates a permanent reference point, a marker that remains stable across centuries. If you wanted to encode information meant to last millennia, you would orient your structure to constants that don't change. True north provides such a constant. So do the stars. When coincidence repeats itself across the globe, it stops being coincidence. Across ancient cultures, the same numbers appear again and again. They appear in temple dimensions, sacred calendars, mythological timelines, and ritual counts from Egypt to India to Mesoamerica. For centuries, historians dismissed these numbers as symbolic or religious preferences, cultural quirks with no deeper significance. But modern astronomy tells a different story. Every 72 years, Earth's axis shifts by 1 degree in a slow wobble called axial precession. This precession is caused by gravitational interactions between Earth, the Sun, and the Moon. It causes the position of stars at the spring equinox to slowly shift through the zodiac constellations over time. Multiply 72 by the full 360 degrees of a circle, and you get 25. 920 years, the length of a full precessional cycle. This number 25,920 is astronomically precise. It represents the time it takes for Earth's axis to complete one full wobble and return to its original orientation. Modern calculations, using satellite data and sophisticated models, place the actual precessional cycle at approximately 25,772 years. The ancient number of 25,920 is remarkably close within 150 years of the modern calculation, a margin of error of less than 1%. Ancient myths across the world describe this same cycle as a great year, a cosmic age, or the reset of civilization itself. Hindu cosmology speaks of yugas, vast cycles of time measured in thousands of years. Mayan calendars track cycles within cycles, including a long count that spans over 5,000 years but fits within larger cycles that echo precessional periods. Greek philosophers discuss the Great Year, when all celestial bodies return to their original positions. These numbers were not chosen for poetry. They were chosen for precision. They were fingerprints left in stone, mathematical truths designed to survive language, culture, and catastrophe. 432. This number appears constantly in ancient traditions. Hindu texts describe 432,000 years as the length of the Kali Yuga. The Norse Eddas speak of 432,000 warriors emerging from Valhalla. Ancient Babylonian records reference cycles of 432,000. This same number relates directly to precession. Is exactly 6 times 72, meaning 432 multiplied by 60 yields 25,920. The number 108 appears in Buddhist and Hindu traditions with striking regularity. Malas contain 108 beads. Sacred texts reference 108 deities, 108 sacred sites, 108 paths to enlightenment. Why 108? Because 108 multiplied by 4 equals 432, and 108 divided by 2 equals 54, half of 108, which multiplied by 480 equals 25, 1920. The sacred numbers interlock like gears in a cosmic clock. These are not random selections. These are calculations. Someone, at some point in deep antiquity, understood precessional cycles with precision that required either sophisticated astronomical observation spanning centuries or inheritance of knowledge from an even earlier source. Even the orientation of pyramids and temples carries meaning. Many align not only with cardinal directions, but with specific stars Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades, celestial bodies long associated with rebirth, cycles of time, and the journey of consciousness. The Orion constellation, in particular, mirrors the layout of the Giza pyramids with uncanny accuracy. The distances, angles, and relative positions match not perfectly, but intentionally as if scaled. The 3 main pyramids of Giza correspond to the 3 stars of Orion's belt. The offset of the smallest pyramid from perfect alignment matches the offset of the faintest star, Mintaka, from the line formed by the other 2 belt stars. This correlation was controversial when first proposed, dismissed as pattern-seeking and coincidence. But the mathematics are demonstrable. The angular relationships between the pyramids match the angular relationships between the stars. The relative sizes correlate with the relative brightness of the stars, and the entire complex is oriented to match Orion's position in the sky, as it would have appeared around 10,500 BC, a date thousands of years before conventional Egyptology places pyramid construction. Why would builders encode a stellar configuration from millennia before their own time unless they were preserving a much older knowledge? Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, held tremendous importance in ancient Egypt. The heliacal rising of Sirius, its first appearance at dawn after a period of invisibility, coincided with the annual flooding of the Nile. The Egyptian calendar was calibrated to this event. The southern shaft of the Great Pyramid's Queen's Chamber aligns precisely to Sirius' position, as it would have appeared in the era attributed to pyramid construction. The Pleiades star cluster appears in myths across every inhabited continent. The Aztecs began their calendar with the Pleiades position. Greek legends feature the 7 sisters prominently. Aboriginal Australian stories reference the cluster. Japanese, Chinese, and Hindu traditions all assign cosmic significance to these stars. Why would cultures separated by vast distances all focus on the same small cluster of stars, unless they inherited this knowledge from a common source? Taken together, these alignments form a map, one that connects Earth and sky into a single, unified system. The monuments are not just observatories. They are models, terrestrial representations of celestial relationships. The ground mirrors the sky. The pyramids become a 3-dimensional star chart, encoding stellar positions, precessional cycles, and astronomical constants in permanent stone. To the ancient builders, geometry was far more than a construction tool. It was a language capable of transmitting knowledge without words. A system that could endure the collapse of civilizations, the erosion of memory, and the passage of thousands of years. Language evolves. Words change meaning. Scripts become unreadable. The Indus Valley script remains undeciphered. Linear A defied translation for decades. Ancient languages die with their speakers, taking their knowledge with them. But mathematics transcends language. Pi is pi in every tongue. A circle is a circle in every culture. The golden ratio appears identically in nature, whether observed in Egypt, China, or Peru. If you wanted to communicate across vast time spans, across the barrier of forgotten languages and lost civilizations, you would encode your message in universal constants. You would use proportions, ratios, and alignments that any sufficiently advanced culture would recognize and understand. The pyramid shape itself is a statement in this language. A square base represents Earth, stability, and the material world. The four triangular faces converging to a single point represent ascension, transcendence, the journey from multiplicity to unity. The geometry encodes philosophical concepts that translate across cultures. But geometry may have served another purpose as well: stability. The pyramid shape is among the most resilient structures ever devised. It distributes weight evenly, resists earthquakes, and withstands erosion better than nearly any other form. The center of mass is low. The base is wide and stable. Forces compress downward through the structure, rather than creating lateral stress that could cause collapse. That alone explains why so many pyramids still stand while entire cities around them have turned to dust. Modern skyscrapers incorporate similar principles. The base must be wider and stronger than the top. Load-bearing elements must channel force efficiently to the foundation. Weight distribution determines structural integrity. The pyramid represents the optimal solution to the problem of building something massive and permanent. Yet some researchers believe the purpose ran deeper. They suggest that pyramid geometry interacts with Earth's natural fields, magnetic, acoustic, and possibly even electromagnetic, in ways we are only beginning to understand. At first, this sounds speculative, until you realize modern science already uses these same principles. In acoustics, certain shapes amplify sound while others cancel it. Concert halls are designed with specific geometric proportions to enhance resonance. Recording studios use angular surfaces to prevent standing waves and echoes. The shape of a room determines how sound behaves within it. In antenna design, geometry determines signal strength and resonance. Satellite dishes are parabolic because that shape focuses electromagnetic waves to a single point. Radio telescopes use specific geometric forms to collect and concentrate signals from deep space. The shape is not arbitrary, it is functional in physics. Structure and frequency are inseparable. Shape influences energy. Energy carries information. Modern experiments show that specific geometric forms can enhance resonance, store vibrational patterns, and influence surrounding fields. Crystalline structures organize atoms in geometric arrays that determine their electrical and optical properties. The atomic arrangement in diamonds makes them strong. The geometry of graphene makes it conductive. Form and function are inseparable at every scale. The ancients may not have used modern terminology, but they clearly understood the relationship between form, frequency, and stability. Inside the Great Pyramid, sound behaves strangely. Certain chambers amplify specific frequencies. The King's Chamber resonates most strongly at approximately 111 Hz, a frequency some researchers associate with altered states of consciousness. Some areas produce standing waves, stable patterns where sound appears to hang in the air. Others seem to dampen sound entirely, creating zones of unusual acoustic silence. Modern acoustic engineers have studied these effects with sophisticated equipment. The granite chambers act as resonance chambers. The dimensions are not random. The ratios between chamber length, width, and height correspond to harmonic intervals found in music and natural resonance. The stone itself, granite with high quartz content, has piezoelectric properties, meaning it generates small electrical charges when subjected to pressure or vibration. And then there are the measurements. The pyramid's internal layout aligns with mathematical ratios found in nature, ratios governing planetary motion, harmonic resonance, and even atomic structure. Its height and base reflect Earth itself. Scaled correctly, the pyramid becomes a model of the planet. The base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, measured in ancient Egyptian royal cubits, relates to Earth's equatorial circumference when using a specific scale factor. The height relates to the distance from Earth's center to the pole when using the same scale. This is not approximate. The relationships work to a degree of precision that suggests the builders knew Earth's dimensions. But how could they know this without satellite measurements? Without the ability to survey the entire planet, without even knowing for certain that Earth was a sphere? Similar relationships appear elsewhere in temples that mirror orbital periods, monuments aligned to solstices and equinoxes, and structures that encode celestial cycles into their very dimensions. Angkor Wat in Cambodia encodes the precessional cycle in its bas-reliefs. The churning of the ocean of milk, depicted on the temple walls, shows 108 devas and 108 asuras, cosmic forces in balance. The temple's central towers represent Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the center of Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. The dimensions and layout encode sacred number 85472. Stonehenge aligns to the summer solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset with precision that demonstrates centuries of astronomical observation. The heel stone frames the sunrise at the exact moment of the summer solstice. The entire structure functions as a calendar, marking seasonal transitions and lunar cycles. The Karnak temple complex in Egypt contains the hypostyle hall, with 134 massive columns arranged in specific geometric patterns. The layout encodes astronomical cycles. The temple's axis aligns to the winter solstice sunset. Side chambers align to stellar positions. The entire complex is an astronomical instrument built at monumental scale. These are not artistic flourishes. They are data, information encoded in stone, positioned in space, aligned with the sky. Each monument is a chapter in a larger text. Each alignment is a sentence. Each proportion is a word. When we examine the angles, alignments, and proportions together, a consistent message emerges. The pyramids were never just tombs. They were never just temples. They were repositories of information archives built to outlast flood, fire, and forgetfulness. Communication that does not rely on language. Communication based on constants that remain true anywhere in the universe. Paul. The golden ratio. Planetary cycles. Stellar alignments. These are universal constants. Any civilization capable of mathematics and astronomy would recognize them. They transcend culture, language, and time. They are the same on Earth as they would be on any planet orbiting any star in any galaxy. If you wanted to send a message across time, these are the constants you would use. Across every continent, the same markers appear as if fragments of a single system were distributed around the globe. The distribution is not random. Pyramids cluster near ancient coastlines. They appear at strategic locations, river valleys, plateau edges, places that would remain significant across millennia. They are positioned as if someone understood global geography, as if the placement itself was part of the message. Nearly every ancient culture carries stories of a great flood, a reset, a time when knowledge was lost and civilization had to begin again. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh describes a flood that destroys humanity. The Hebrew Bible recounts Noah's Ark. Hindu texts describe Manu surviving a deluge. Greek myths speak of Deucalion's flood. Chinese legends reference Gun, Yu controlling the Great Flood. Native American traditions across both continents describe water overwhelming the world. Australian Aboriginal stories remember when the seas rose and consumed the land. If such legends hold even a fraction of truth, then the pyramids take on a new meaning. Not monuments to the dead, but guideposts for the future. Blueprints left behind by a civilization or civilizations that understood collapse was inevitable. Perhaps they witnessed it before. Perhaps they survived a previous reset and knew another would come. Perhaps they looked at the cycle of civilizations rising and falling and decided to leave markers for whoever came after. Messages in stone that could survive what flesh and paper could not. An archive meant not for their time, but for ours. Even today, the story isn't finished. Advanced scans reveal hidden chambers deep within pyramids, voids with no known purpose, strange heat signatures, and unexplained electromagnetic anomalies. In 2017, muon particle scans detected a massive void above the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid. The chamber had remained hidden for over 500 years. Its purpose remains unknown. It is too large to be a construction accident, too precisely positioned to be random. It waits, sealed, untouched, holding whatever the builders placed inside. Thermal imaging shows temperature variations in pyramid stones that suggest hidden passages. Some blocks remain cooler than surrounding material, indicating air gaps behind them. Some areas show heat retention patterns inconsistent with solid stone. Electromagnetic surveys detect anomalies beneath pyramid foundations. Underground chambers that don't appear in any historical records. Geometric voids that could be rooms, tunnels, or structures we don't yet understand. The more our technology improves, the more these structures seem to respond, as if they were built to be rediscovered in stages. As if they were waiting. Each new scanning technology reveals features invisible to previous methods. Satellite radar revealed structures hidden beneath desert sand. Muon tomography saw through solid stone to detect voids. LiDAR mapped entire cities hidden under jungle canopy. Electromagnetic surveys found anomalies that traditional excavation never suspected. It's as if the monuments are teaching us, revealing their secrets slowly, layer by layer, as we develop the technology to understand them. The builders anticipated future discovery. They built in redundancy, encoding the same information multiple ways, ensuring that even if some elements were destroyed or misunderstood, enough would survive for later generations to reconstruct the pattern. And maybe that's exactly what's happening now. Because as we reassemble the pattern, the builders, the precision, the geometry, their silent message finally begins to take shape. The question is no longer how they built them. We may never fully understand the construction methods, Though theories continue to develop, we may never replicate their precision using ancient tools. But the how is secondary. The question is, why did they need to? Why invest such enormous resources, such tremendous effort, such precise calculation into structures that would outlast their civilization by millennia? Why encode astronomical cycles that wouldn't complete for thousands of years? Why align to stellar positions that wouldn't recur within their lifetimes, or their children's lifetimes, or 100 generations of lifetimes? They were building for us, not for themselves, for the future, for whoever came after the reset they knew was coming. And what were they preparing us for? Perhaps the same thing they faced. Perhaps the cycle they encoded in stone is not just historical record but prophecy. Perhaps the precessional numbers, the astronomical alignments, the geometric constants are not merely information but instruction. Perhaps the pyramids are telling us this has happened before. It will happen again. Here is what you need to know. Here is what you need to remember. The message is still revealing itself. We are still learning to read the language, but the urgency becomes clearer with each translation. These monuments were built by people who understood that knowledge could be lost, that civilizations could fall, that memory could be erased. They chose stone over paper, geometry over words, universal constants over cultural symbols. They left us a message that transcends time. Now we need to finish reading it, because the patterns they preserved might not just explain our past. They might prepare us for our future. The pyramids stand, patient and permanent, holding knowledge we are only beginning to access. The question is no longer whether they contain a message. The question is whether we will understand it in time. Now we are exploring the Bosnia's pyramid mysteries. By the time the trail reaches Bosnia, the recurring pattern becomes impossible to overlook. Every continent seems to hold echoes of the same mystery. Pyramids that defy logic, discoveries dismissed before full study, authorities and institutions that appear determined to keep history neat, safe, and unchallenged. Bosnia would prove no exception. In 2005, a Bosnian researcher named Samir Osmanagic arrived in the small town of Visoko and noticed something that most people had never questioned. A hill that locals had lived beside for generations looked, to him, wrong. Not wrong in the way a strange rock looks wrong, but wrong in the way a structure looks wrong when it is pretending to be natural. Its sides were unusually straight. Its angles looked sharpened, as if carved. Its peak held a symmetry that felt deliberate. Osmanagic stood there and saw what no one else had dared to label, a pyramid. He called it the Pyramid of the Sun, and from that moment, Visoko stopped being a quiet valley. It became a fault line, a place where two versions of history would collide. Excavations began, and almost immediately, the story turned volatile. Layers of stone terraces appeared beneath soil and vegetation. Some looked stacked, some looked fitted. In certain sections, the surfaces appeared too flat, too consistent, and too ordered to be dismissed easily by the human eye. The stones themselves told a curious story. While critics insisted they were natural sandstone formations fractured by geological processes, the excavation teams documented what they called concrete-like material. Samples were sent to laboratories. Some results showed compositions unlike surrounding bedrock. Others revealed binding materials that seemed inconsistent with natural formation. The scientific community remained divided, but not equally. The weight of institutional authority leaned heavily toward rejection. Then came the tunnels. Beneath the hills, corridors stretched through the earth. A network of passages that volunteers and teams slowly cleared, revealing chambers and junctions that seemed to run in intentional directions. Osmanagic claimed these tunnels connected multiple hills, each of which he believed was part of one unified complex. He gave them names that sounded like a myth being written in real time. The Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Dragon. Smaller mounds and ridges that, according to his team, were aligned with the cardinal directions like components of a planned design. Inside these tunnels, the air felt different. Volunteers reported a stillness that seemed almost engineered. The walls showed tool marks in some sections, smooth surfaces in others. Water channels ran along certain passages with a regularity that suggested deliberate construction. At intersections, chambers opened up with dimensions that felt purposeful rather than random. Critics argued these were simply medieval mining operations, long forgotten by the local population. But medieval mines typically show evidence of extraction, of ore removal, of economic purpose. These tunnels showed none of that. They led nowhere obvious. They extracted nothing visible. They simply existed, winding beneath the hills like the circulatory system of something vast and buried. As the digging continued, technology entered the picture. Ground-penetrating scans suggested geometric cavities beneath the surface. Measurements taken at the summit reported faint electromagnetic and ultrasonic pulses. Not chaotic noise, not random interference. Rhythmic signals repeating in patterns. Teams brought in additional equipment. Thermal imaging revealed temperature anomalies. Acoustic measurements detected resonance frequencies that seemed to concentrate at specific points. Some researchers claimed the entire hill acted like a resonant chamber, amplifying certain wavelengths while dampening others. The data accumulated, but it did not clarify. Instead, it deepened the mystery, splitting observers into increasingly polarized camps. Osman Ajit claimed that what they were hearing and recording could not be natural. And if it was not natural, then Bosnia was not merely hiding a pyramid. Bosnia was hiding a pyramid complex that could be larger than any known on Earth. That single idea carried an implication so heavy it nearly crushed the conversation. If it was true, then the accepted timeline of civilization would not just be incomplete, it would be fundamentally wrong. The backlash came fast. Mainstream archaeologists and geologists rejected the claim almost instantly. They called the slopes natural results of erosion. They said the stone blocks were fractured sandstone and naturally layered formations. They argued that tunnels were old mines, forgotten by locals but common in the region. They pointed to instrument limitations and insisted that energy readings meant nothing in a landscape filled with variables. But the rejection felt strangely rushed. Peer-reviewed papers dismissing the site appeared before comprehensive studies could be completed. Conferences excluded presentations about Visoko without review. Funding dried up for independent research. The conversation was shut down before it could fully begin. Not through evidence, but through consensus. A manufactured consensus that felt more like protection than science. The excavation was branded pseudo-archaeology. Professional organizations warned that the project was misleading the public and damaging real heritage. Some critics went further, saying it was not just wrong but dangerous, because it undermined trust in science and historical study. International experts urged Bosnia's government to halt the work entirely. The European Association of Archaeologists issued formal statements condemning the excavations. UNESCO was pressured to intervene. Academic journals refused to publish findings from the site, regardless of methodology or data quality. The message was clear and unified. Visoko was not worth investigating because the conclusion had already been determined. Natural formation. Case closed. Move along. Within months, the media turned the story into entertainment. Headlines mocked it. Clips were edited to make it look absurd. Visoko became a global punchline for a while, the kind of story people shared with a smile, as if mystery itself was something childish. Television documentaries framed it as delusion. Internet forums weaponized skepticism into ridicule. The site became synonymous with conspiracy theory, lumped together with flat Earth and ancient aliens, dismissed before examination. The cultural machinery of certainty had done its work efficiently. Bosnia was now a cautionary tale, not about archaeology, but about the dangers of questioning established narratives. But the ground does not care about ridicule. The Earth does not change its shape because experts disagree, and so the discoveries continued. Volunteers uncovered surfaces that looked paved. They found stones with what appeared to be deliberate markings. Some reported ancient tools and artifacts, though critics argued these could be displaced, misidentified, or unrelated to the hill's formation. Samples taken for radiocarbon dating returned conflicting results. Some indicated material only a few thousand years old. Others suggested ages far deeper into the past. One particularly controversial dating result placed organic material found within the supposed concrete blocks at over 20,000 years old. If accurate, this would predate the currently accepted emergence of advanced civilization by more than 10 millennia. The result was immediately challenged, not on technical grounds but on theoretical ones. It could not be correct because it contradicted the timeline. Therefore, it must be wrong. This circular reasoning appeared repeatedly in academic responses to Visoko findings. The data refused to sit calmly inside the official explanation. And to many observers, the reaction felt familiar, a cycle that repeats whenever a find threatens the established narrative. Deny, discredit, move on. Not because every unusual claim is true, but because the gatekeepers of history tend to react defensively when the stakes are enormous. The Bosnian pyramids were suddenly placed alongside other controversial sites. Gunung Padang in Indonesia, where layers beneath the surface hint at construction older than expected. The hidden pyramid, like mounds of China, where restrictions and limited access have fueled speculation for decades. Other enigmatic complexes that stand on the edge between accepted archaeology and forbidden questions. Each of these sites shares a common trajectory. Initial discovery generates excitement. Early investigations reveal anomalies. Establishment authorities intervene. The site is reclassified, restricted, or ridiculed. Research funding evaporates. The conversation shifts from evidence to credibility, and the mystery remains, frozen in a state of official dismissal while amateur researchers continue documenting what professionals refuse to examine. This is where the story becomes complicated, because Osmanajit himself did not stop at architecture. He proposed the pyramids were not just built structures but functional devices, energy generators, resonance systems that interacted with Earth's fields and transmitted subtle frequencies. He spoke of planetary networks, of purposeful alignments, of a technology lost to time. For many, those claims are where credibility snaps. Even people who are open to alternative history hesitate when the conversation shifts from stones and dates to invisible power systems. It sounds like science fiction. It sounds like fantasy. The energy hypothesis introduced concepts that modern science struggles to accommodate. Osmanajit suggested the pyramids generated and focused what he called scalar waves, a controversial form of energy proposed in alternative physics but not accepted by mainstream science. He claimed instruments detected beams of energy emanating from the pyramid's summit, intensifying as they rose into the atmosphere. He spoke of healing properties, of consciousness effects, of technologies that our current paradigm cannot measure or understand. These claims alienated potential allies. Researchers who might have defended the architectural evidence found themselves unable to support the metaphysical elements. The conversation fractured. What could have been a legitimate archaeological controversy became entangled with fringe theories, making it easier for critics to dismiss everything wholesale. The baby went out with the bathwater, and perhaps that was inevitable. Perhaps that was even intentional. And yet, even if you discard all of that, even if you ignore every claim about energy and transmission, the simplest question remains. If the Visoko formations are purely natural, why do they display such consistent geometry? Why do they show terraces that resemble steps? Why do they have tunnel systems that seem to run with unusual continuity? Why do multiple hills in the same valley exhibit similar angular faces pointing in cardinal directions? Why does ground-penetrating radar reveal geometric voids beneath the surface? Why do the slopes maintain consistent angles across hundreds of meters? Geology can create strange things, yes. Nature makes patterns. Mountains can have flat faces. Erosion can create steps. Minerals can form regular layers. But nature rarely makes patterns that so closely resemble human intention, especially at this scale, and especially in clusters that mirror the pyramid complexes found across the world. Natural explanations exist for almost any individual feature. A flat face could be a sheared geological plane. Steps could be differential erosion of layered rock. Tunnels could be natural caves or old mines. But when all these features appear together, in multiple hills, oriented in meaningful directions, the cumulative probability of pure coincidence drops dramatically. At what point does the extraordinary claim shift from, "this is artificial," to, "this is entirely natural"? This is why the Bosnia story refuses to die. Because it is not just about a hill. It is about the moment when discovery meets resistance, and how quickly curiosity is replaced by certainty. The deeper story is not only whether Bosnia's pyramids are real, it is how we respond when the possibility exists. Instead of investigation, the world often chooses instant rejection. Instead of controlled open research, we see ridicule. The public is trained to laugh first, to dismiss the mystery before it can become uncomfortable. Because a tidy narrative is safer than a disrupted one. History becomes comfortable when it stays linear. Mesopotamia invents writing. Egypt builds pyramids. Greece develops philosophy. Rome spreads engineering. The Renaissance rediscovers lost knowledge. The Industrial Revolution propels us forward. Each civilization builds upon the last in a neat progression from simple to complex. This story is digestible. It fits textbooks. It validates our sense of progress. But it may also be incomplete. Nearly 2 decades later, the Bosnian site is still being excavated, but largely outside traditional academic oversight. Thousands of tourists arrive each year. Volunteers continue to clear tunnels and document what they find. Visitors describe the place in radically different ways. Some see only natural rock. Some feel an eerie deliberateness, as if they are walking inside something planned. The site has become a pilgrimage destination for alternative researchers and curious travelers. Tour groups walk through the tunnels, listening to guides explain the competing theories. Some visitors report unusual experiences, feelings of heightened energy or unexpected emotional responses. Skeptics attribute this to suggestion and expectation. Believers see it as confirmation. The site has become a Rorschach test, revealing more about the observer than the observed. The local economy has transformed. Visoko was a struggling post-war town. Now it has hotels, restaurants, souvenir shops. The pyramid controversy, regardless of its truth, brought life back to a forgotten valley. Critics point to this as motivation for perpetuating a hoax. Supporters argue economic benefit does not invalidate archaeological evidence. Both can be true simultaneously. A false claim can generate tourism. A genuine discovery can also generate tourism. The presence of money does not determine the reality of stone. But almost everyone agrees on one thing. Visoko feels different. Even skeptics sometimes leave with a strange hesitation, not convinced but unsettled. Because the human mind has a built-in alarm for patterns. When we see orders repeat too many times, we stop calling it a chance. This intuition is both powerful and dangerous. It can lead us to genuine discoveries. It can also lead us astray, finding faces in clouds and meaning in randomness. The challenge is distinguishing between true pattern recognition and apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections between unrelated things. But perhaps the greater danger is dismissing pattern recognition entirely, refusing to investigate because we fear being wrong. Bosnia mirrors the same tension we have seen from Indonesia to China, the point where something old pushes against what we have been taught. Maybe the Visoko Hills truly are human-made. Maybe Gunung Padang is the oldest of them all. Or maybe even the pyramids of Giza are older than the official dates, built upon foundations that belong to a forgotten epoch. Every site tells its own version of the same mystery, yet all share one trait. The dates never align cleanly, and the official answers are never fully satisfied. Something about our story of civilization does not add up. Either we are missing chapters, or we are looking at the wrong timeline entirely. Whether the truth remains buried because of caution, pride, or control, the pattern is unmistakable. Somewhere between the jungles of Indonesia, the sands of Egypt, and the hills of Bosnia lies the real beginning of the pyramid story, a chapter still untold. And if a small valley in Bosnia can spark this much controversy, imagine what awaits in the Americas. Because in the Americas, pyramids do not hide beneath hills. They rise above the jungle canopy in staggering numbers. From Mexico to Guatemala, from Belize to Honduras, and deep into Peru, thousands of these monuments still stand, vast and weathered. Some crumble in silence. Some are still being uncovered beneath forests that swallowed them for centuries. Others remain visible, towering over modern cities like ghosts that never left. The sheer scale becomes overwhelming when you survey it comprehensively. Mexico alone contains thousands of pyramid structures, many still unexcavated. The Yucatan Peninsula hides entire cities beneath jungle canopy, revealed only recently through LiDAR technology that penetrates the dense vegetation. Guatemala's Tikal contains over 3,000 structures. The Mirador Basin reveals complexes larger than previously imagined. Honduras, Belize, El Salvador. Each country adds hundreds more to the count. Here, the mystery is no longer about whether pyramids exist. It is about why they exist in such numbers. Why the design repeats across distances that should have made cultural sharing impossible. And why these structures, once again, align with the sky. Mesoamerican pyramids were often built with stairways that face specific directions, timed to solstices, equinoxes, and celestial events. In places like Chichen Itza, architecture becomes a calendar. A shadow serpent appears on a staircase during equinoxes, as if the building itself is performing a ritual with sunlight. The precision required for this effect is remarkable. The pyramid must be oriented exactly. The staircase angle must be calculated precisely. The balustrade must be positioned to catch the sun at the correct moment during the correct day of the year. This is not accidental architecture. This is not trial and error. This is sophisticated astronomical knowledge encoded in stone, built by people we are told had no advanced instruments, no telescopes, no mathematical models of celestial mechanics. In Teotihuacan, a city laid out with immense precision, the Avenue of the Dead cuts through structures aligned in ways that still raise questions. The Pyramid of the Sun there shares a name with the Bosnian hill, almost mockingly, as if the same symbol is following us. The entire city follows a geometric plan. Buildings align to a baseline tilted 15.5 degrees from true north, an orientation that remains unexplained. Some researchers suggest it points to the setting position of the Pleiades in ancient times. Others propose alignments to Sirius or other celestial markers. The Avenue of the Dead stretches for miles with monuments placed at precise intervals. From above, the city looks like a circuit board, like something designed with mathematical intention. Who designed this? The conventional answer names the people who lived there later, but admits we do not know who founded it. Teotihuacan was already ancient and abandoned when the Aztecs arrived. They named it place where the gods were created, because they believed it was too grand for human origin. Even they, separated by only centuries, had no memory of its builders. In Peru, the pyramids are different, sometimes stepped, sometimes layered, sometimes built from adobe rather than stone, yet the same geometric impulse remains. The same idea that a mountain can be shaped into meaning. Carroll, one of the oldest urban centers in the Americas, features pyramid platforms dated to around 5,000 years ago, contemporary with the Egyptian pyramids. The city shows evidence of sophisticated urban planning, agricultural systems, and astronomical knowledge. Yet it existed in complete isolation from old-world civilizations, or so we are told. How did pyramid architecture emerge independently in Peru, at precisely the same period it emerged in Egypt? Coincidence stacks upon coincidence until probability itself becomes suspect. And beneath these pyramids, just like in Bosnia, tunnels and chambers appear. Some are burial spaces, some are ceremonial, some are still unexplained. At Chavan de Huanta, a labyrinth of tunnels runs beneath the temple complex. Acoustic properties suggest the tunnels were designed to amplify sound, creating disorienting effects and powerful resonances. Water channels run through the system, perhaps to create additional sound effects. The tunnels may have been used for ritual purposes, sensory manipulation, or functions we cannot yet comprehend. They remain, silent and strange beneath the Peruvian highlands. Everywhere we see the same strange mixture: astronomy, geometry, myth, and silence. It is almost as if the pyramid was never just a building, but a concept, a signature, a technology of memory. Now step back and look at the global picture. Egypt has pyramids. Sudan has pyramids. China has pyramids like mounds. Indonesia has megalithic terraces. Bosnia might have buried pyramids. Mesoamerica has pyramids by the thousands. Peru has pyramids and sacred complexes. Even islands and remote regions have stepped structures that echo the same ancient geometry. The Canary Islands contain pyramid structures that remain controversial. Japan has underwater formations off Yonaguni that some argue show artificial modification. Pacific Islands contain megalithic platforms with astronomical alignments. India has step pyramids in temple complexes. Cambodia has Angkor Wat with its temple mountains. The list extends further with each passing year, as new sites are discovered and old sites are reconsidered. Civilizations that should have been isolated kept arriving at the same solution. So the question becomes sharper. Are we looking at independent inventions, or are we looking at a shared inheritance? Because if this was just an architectural preference, we would see variations dominate. We would see randomness. We would see cultures choose different sacred forms, different universal monuments. Humans build in diverse ways. We create round structures, square structures, domed buildings, tall towers, underground chambers, cliff dwellings. Architectural diversity is vast. Yet when it comes to the most sacred monuments, when ancient cultures wanted to build something permanent and meaningful, they repeatedly chose the pyramid, the stepped mountain, the artificial hill climbing toward the sky. But we do not see random diversity in pyramid construction. We see repetition. And repetition across the world is the language of something deeper, a blueprint, or a memory passed down, or a response to a shared event. Nearly every culture also carries stories of catastrophe. Floods, fire from the sky, ages ending, worlds wiped clean. Survivors rebuild with fragments of old knowledge. The myths vary, but the structure remains eerily consistent. A golden age, a fall, a reset, a rebuilding. The Sumerians spoke of kings who reigned before the flood. The Greeks remembered Atlantis, a civilization destroyed by catastrophe. Hindu texts describe cycles of creation and destruction spanning incomprehensible time periods. Chinese legends recall ancient emperors with magical powers predating recorded history. Native American tribes across both continents tell of previous worlds destroyed by water, fire, or ice. Australian Aboriginal traditions speak of a time before the rising seas transformed their land. These stories are dismissed as mythology, as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. But mythology often preserves historical memory in metaphorical form. Oral traditions can maintain accurate information for thousands of years. Perhaps these stories are not fantasies. Perhaps they are fragments of actual events, preserved through generations, waiting for us to recognize their truth. What if pyramids were part of that rebuilding? Not just temples, not just tombs, but anchors, markers that survived the reset. Because if you wanted to preserve knowledge across a collapse, you would not store it in paper or fragile libraries. You would store it in form, in proportions, in alignments, in stone. You would build monuments that could withstand floods, earthquakes, fires. You would encode information in ways that transcend language, mathematical relationships that any advanced civilization would recognize, astronomical alignments that point to specific dates, proportions that demonstrate knowledge of pi, the golden ratio, the dimensions of the Earth itself. You would encode truth in geometry, because geometry does not depend on language. A circle is a circle in every culture. Pi is pi everywhere. The golden ratio repeats in nature, in shells, in galaxies, in the human body. If you wanted to leave a message to the future, you would build it into constants the universe cannot change. The Great Pyramid of Giza encodes the number pi in its dimensions. The ratio of its perimeter to its height gives you 2 pi when calculated in specific units. The pyramid also encodes the dimensions of the Earth. Its base perimeter relates to Earth's equatorial circumference. Its height relates to the distance from Earth's center to the pole. These relationships work within margins of error far smaller than we would expect from a tomb built with copper tools. Is this coincidence? Or is this exactly what you would do if you wanted to preserve geodetic knowledge through millennia, encoding it in the largest, most permanent structure you could build? And perhaps that is what the pyramid network really is. Not a coincidence, not a curiosity, but an archive spread across the globe. Redundant copies of crucial information scattered widely enough that some would survive whatever catastrophe destroyed the original civilization. Each pyramid is a chapter. Each alignment is a sentence. Each proportion of a word in a language we are only beginning to remember how to read. Which brings us to the most unsettling part of all. If the world holds a network of structures that appear to share design principles and cosmic alignments, then we are forced to ask why the story of civilization is told as isolated sparks. Why do we study Egypt as if it is separate from the Americas? Why do we treat Indonesia like a local anomaly? Why do we laugh at Bosnia instead of examining it calmly? The current paradigm demands that civilizations develop independently, inventing agriculture, writing, mathematics, and architecture in isolation from each other. This model supports the progressive narrative. Humans start simple and become complex. Each culture climbs the ladder separately. Contact between distant civilizations was impossible or minimal until recent centuries. But what if that model is wrong? What if there was contact? What if there was a parent civilization whose children spread across the globe, each carrying fragments of the original knowledge? What if the pyramids are not independent inventions but echoes of a single source? Maybe the answer is simple. Maybe it is institutional caution. Maybe it is the fear of sensationalism. Maybe it is the need to protect academic standards. These are legitimate concerns. Archaeology has been damaged by sensational claims and fraudulent discoveries. Professional standards exist for good reasons. Peer review catches errors. Skepticism prevents premature conclusions. The scientific method requires reproducible evidence, not speculation. All of this is true and valuable, but there is another possibility. The possibility that some truths are destabilizing. Because if the pyramid story is older than we think, then the timeline breaks. And when the timeline breaks, everything built on it begins to wobble. Origins, migration, evolution of knowledge, the rise of cities, the development of astronomy, the emergence of mathematics, all of it. If advanced civilization existed 15,000 years ago instead of 5,000, then the entire narrative of human development collapses. Textbooks have become obsolete. Academic reputations built on the old timeline crumble. Decades of research require re-evaluation. The embarrassment is institutional. The disruption is profound, and perhaps more troubling. If an advanced civilization existed and was then destroyed, the comforting story of inevitable progress dissolves. We like to believe humanity moves inexorably forward, that knowledge accumulates, that we are always building toward greater sophistication. But if a civilization rose to great heights and then fell, leaving only massive stone monuments behind, then progress is not inevitable. Collapse is possible. Everything we have built could be lost. That is an uncomfortable thought, destabilizing, existentially threatening. Maybe that is why the gates remain closed. Not from malice, but from fear. A single buried pyramid can become an earthquake in the human story. And that is why Bosnia matters, regardless of the final verdict. Because Bosnia is not just a site, it is a mirror. It reflects how quickly society chooses certainty over investigation. It reflects how uncomfortable we become when the past refuses to behave. It reflects the moment when history stops being a record and becomes a battlefield. Bosnia shows us our own resistance to mystery. It reveals the machinery that protects consensus, even when consensus may be wrong. It demonstrates how ridicule functions as a social control mechanism, deterring investigation through mockery rather than evidence. And it proves that some questions are not allowed to be asked, not because they have been answered, but because the answers might be too disruptive to accommodate. So now we move forward, from Bosnia to the Americas, from hidden hills to visible temples, from a controversy wrapped in ridicule to monuments standing openly in the sun. And as we enter that world of jungle pyramids and forgotten cities, the mystery evolves. Because in the Americas, the question is not whether pyramids exist. The question is why the same design appears again and again, across oceans and eras, and why every time we get close to answering it, something pulls us back. A missing inscription, a sealed chamber, a collapsed tunnel, a dating result that no one wants to touch, a narrative that refuses to bend. In Mexico, certain chambers beneath pyramids remain sealed, access restricted, excavations halted. Official explanations cite preservation concerns, but whispers persist of discoveries too controversial to announce. In Egypt, sealed shafts and hidden chambers have been detected but not opened, their contents remaining mysterious for decades. In China, the massive pyramid mounds near Xi'an are off-limits, protected as imperial tombs but never excavated, their secrets preserved through bureaucratic restriction rather than scientific investigation. Why do some discoveries emerge into public consciousness while others remain buried in archives and restricted journals? Why do some researchers receive funding and recognition while others are marginalized and dismissed? The answers are complex, involving politics, economics, cultural sensitivities, and legitimate archaeological concerns. But the pattern suggests something more: a selective revelation, a controlled narrative, a gatekeeping of information that determines which stories we are allowed to know. If the pyramid story has a true beginning, it is not in one country, it is global, and somewhere, buried beneath layers of official explanation and forgotten time, there is a connection, not a coincidence, not dozens of independent cultures stumbling upon the same architectural solution, but a memory, a shared inheritance from something older than we have admitted, a civilization that existed before the recognized dawn, whose monuments we still walk among, whose knowledge we still stand beneath, whose message we have not yet fully heard. The pyramids are speaking, in stone and alignment, in proportion and position. They are telling a story. But we have forgotten how to listen, or perhaps we are afraid of what we might hear, because once we acknowledge the global pattern, once we admit that these monuments might share a common origin, we must confront the implications. We must ask who built them. When they were built, why were they built? And what happened to the builders? Those questions lead to answers that challenge every comfortable assumption about our past. And maybe, in the end, that is the real reason the gates stay closed. Not because we lack evidence, but because we fear the truth. The pyramids remain, patient and eternal, waiting for us to gather the courage to truly investigate what they represent. Bosnia is just one more chapter in that waiting. One more site where the past pushes against the present, where mystery meets resistance, where the possibility of a different history hangs suspended between investigation and dismissal. The story continues. The excavations continue. The discoveries continue. And somewhere beneath the hills of Bosnia, beneath the jungles of Guatemala, beneath the sands of Egypt and the waters of forgotten coasts, the truth waits. Silent, buried, but not forgotten, never forgotten, because the pyramids remember even when we do not. I want to explore next mystery. In the deserts of northern Egypt, time seems to have stopped. The endless sands and dry winds preserve a landscape that looks unchanged for millennia. Yet at its center stand monuments that almost feel misplaced, structures so exact that they seem to carry a kind of memory. The three mighty pyramids of Giza rise from the plateau in a balance that is almost unsettling. They do not simply stand there, they watch, silent, unmoved, as if waiting for the world to finally ask the right questions. The largest among them, the Great Pyramid, does not behave like a normal ancient building. Its base spreads across more than 13 acres. Its sides run so straight and so consistently that even modern visitors who arrive with cameras and confidence often leave with a quiet doubt. Each face is nearly the same length, accurate within a small margin that feels too clean for a project supposedly finished by hand. The slope, fixed at about 51 degrees, seems deliberate. Many researchers point out that it can be interpreted in ways that echo mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio. Whether that encoding was intentional is debated, but the fact remains, the geometry is astonishing. Then there is the alignment. The Great Pyramid points toward the true north with a precision that seems more at home in modern surveying than in an ancient world. The more you study it, the more it feels less like a tomb and more like a machine made of stone, a massive object calibrated to face the planet itself. Mainstream archaeology places its construction around 2560 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, and often suggests it was completed within roughly 2 decades. That timeline is possible in theory, but it opens a problem that never goes away. The Egyptians left extensive records. They wrote about harvest taxes, royal decrees, religious festivals, and even small disputes. Yet we do not have a clear, step-by-step account of how their greatest monument was planned and built. We have hints and fragments. We have inscriptions from workers in other contexts. We have theories based on ramps and labor organization. But we do not have a blueprint carved into a wall saying, "This is how we built the Great Pyramid." That silence is one of the reasons the mystery survives. The common explanation is that around 2 million blocks of limestone and granite were cut, moved, and set into place by large teams using sleds, ropes, ramps, and extraordinary coordination. Some blocks are manageable, others weigh many tons. A few granite beams inside the king's chamber are so massive that even today, lifting and positioning them would require careful planning and heavy equipment. If the pyramid was finished within 20 years, the pace would have been relentless. That does not make it impossible, but it makes it difficult to visualize without imagining a workforce and a logistical system operating like a modern industrial project. So how was it done? Some point to long straight ramps. Others argue for spiraling ramps or internal ramps or counterweight systems. Each theory solves one problem and creates another. A long ramp large enough for the Great Pyramid would be enormous, almost a monument on its own. A spiral ramp changes the angles and raises stability issues. An internal ramp is elegant, but hard to prove without invasive investigation. Every explanation feels close, but never fully complete. And that is where the pyramid begins to feel like it is holding something back. Because construction is only the first layer of the mystery. The second layer is knowledge. The Great Pyramid is not just big, it is precise in ways that lead to unsettling questions. Some measurements and proportions appear to mirror relationships found in Earth geometry. Some alignments appear to point towards specific stars, including regions associated with Orion. Again, scholars debate how much of this is intentional design and how much is pattern-seeking. But the star alignment is difficult to ignore, because ancient Egypt did not treat the sky as decoration. They treated it as a map of destiny. The link to Orion was powerful in Egyptian belief. Orion was associated with Osiris, a god tied to death and rebirth. Sirius was linked to cycles that governed the Nile's flooding and the rhythm of life itself. If a pharaoh was meant to rise after death, the sky was the destination, and the pyramid could be a ladder made of stone. There is also the arrangement of the 3 pyramids. Many people notice how they resemble Orion's belt in pattern. Some researchers argue that the match is too close to dismiss, while others say the resemblance is exaggerated and not exact enough. But even the argument itself is revealing. The pyramids invite celestial comparisons. They provoke the feeling that they were built with the heavens in mind. Then comes another uncomfortable detail. If Egyptian engineering steadily improved, we would expect early pyramids to be rough prototypes and later pyramids to be flawless. Yet in some ways, the opposite appears. The Great Pyramid stands as the most precise, the most ambitious, and the most enduring. Later pyramids, built after the peak of the Old Kingdom, often show less precision, less material quality, and in some cases structural failure. There are mainstream explanations for that too. Politics changed, resources shifted, religious priorities evolved, construction methods adapted. But still, that reversal keeps the mystery alive, because it feels like the story is missing a chapter, as if the earliest builders had access to a method, a standard, or a body of knowledge that later generations could imitate but not fully replicate. And then we reach the question that never stops haunting the Great Pyramid: purpose. We are told the pyramids were royal tombs. That makes sense in a broad cultural context, because Egyptians built elaborate burial traditions. Yet the Great Pyramid itself is strangely empty. No inscriptions describing Khufu's burial, no clear funerary text inside, no confirmed mummy recovered from the chambers, no treasure cache waiting behind a sealed wall. The king's chamber is bare stone. The queen's chamber is bare stone. The corridors feel less like a decorated resting place and more like a carefully designed interior system. That does not prove it was not a tomb. It could have been looted long ago. It could have been sealed and reopened. It could have been emptied. History is full of lost burials, but the emptiness creates room for other possibilities. And once that room exists, theories rush in. Some suggest the pyramid served as an observatory. Others suggest it was a monument built to preserve knowledge. Some propose it was part of a ritual technology designed to mirror cosmic cycles. Others go further, describing it as an energy structure that interacted with Earth's fields. These ideas range from plausible to highly speculative, and it is important to say that many are not accepted by mainstream scholarship. Yet the reason they persist is simple. The pyramid feels engineered, not merely built, engineered. Its internal chambers are positioned with a sense of intention. Its shafts are narrow and specific. Its geometry is consistent. It is as if the builders wanted the structure to behave in certain ways, not just to stand there. In the 1990s and onward, scans and surveys beneath the Giza Plateau fueled even more debate. Reports circulated about cavities and tunnel-like spaces beneath the plateau. Some researchers claimed there could be sealed chambers underground. Others argued that voids and cavities are common in limestone terrain and do not automatically indicate hidden rooms. Still, the idea took hold because it matched the atmosphere of Giza itself. The plateau feels layered, like a place built upon, rebuilt, and buried again. The Sphinx deepens that feeling. There have long been claims, some supported and many disputed, about possible chambers around the Sphinx and beneath it. Some of these claims are tied to old legends about a hidden archive, sometimes called a hall of records. Mainstream Egyptology does not accept that story as an established fact, but it remains part of the mythic gravity of Giza. The site attracts not only tourists but seekers, people who feel that the sand is covering more than tombs. And when people ask to dig, the answer is often no. Egyptian antiquities authorities restrict excavations for many reasons, including preservation, tourism management, and national heritage protection. Those are valid concerns. But restriction also creates suspicion, especially when rumors and half-confirmed scans circulate online. When access is limited, mystery grows faster than answers. One of the most intriguing and most restricted features near Giza is the Osiris shaft. It is a deep structure with descending levels carved into bedrock, sometimes partially flooded. Accounts describe chambers and passages, and a sense that the site connects to a broader underground world that most visitors never see. How much is ceremonial, how much is structural, and how much is still undiscovered remains unclear to the public. The result is predictable. People imagine, and imagination has a way of becoming a second history. Then, as if Egypt is not enough, the story spreads south. Across the border into Sudan, the Nubian pyramids of Meroe stand like a continuation of the idea. They are smaller and steeper. Many were built by the Kushite civilization long after Egypt's earliest pyramid age. They show that the pyramid concept traveled and endured, but also that something changed. The shape remained, yet the extreme precision and monumental ambition did not always follow. It feels to some observers like a copy of a copy, the symbol surviving while the original method fades. So now we arrive at the present. Today, the Giza pyramids are protected, heavily managed, and endlessly studied. Yet the central questions remain. The construction methods are debated. The purpose remains debated. The astronomical alignments are debated. The underground mysteries remain debated. And the deeper you go, the more you begin to sense that the pyramids are not simply historical objects. They are triggers. They trigger arguments. They trigger fascination. They trigger discomfort. Because they sit at the intersection of human pride and human uncertainty. We want to believe we understand where we came from. We want a clean timeline. We want progress to move in a straight line. But the pyramids do not feel like a straight line. They feel like a jump, a leap in precision planning, and scale that forces a dangerous question. What if we are missing an older layer of the story? Not necessarily aliens, not necessarily magic, not necessarily a fantasy answer, just a missing chapter, a lost tradition, an earlier period of knowledge that did not survive in texts, only in stone. And here is where the Forbidden Fathoms trail turns darker. Because while Egypt guards its monuments in plain sight, another ancient empire appears to have done the opposite. Not protection through fences and permits, but protection through disappearance. In China, the pyramids are not marketed like Giza. They are not presented as the great wonder of the world. Many are described as burial mounds, and some are said to be restricted or obscured. Surrounded by forest and farmland, stories persist about enormous pyramid-like structures that few outsiders can examine closely. Some accounts are exaggerated, some are uncertain, and some are likely misunderstood. Yet the fact that these structures exist at all expands the pattern. Pyramids in Africa, pyramids in the Americas, possible pyramids in Europe, terraced pyramid forms in Asia. Across cultures, across oceans, the same silhouette keeps rising from the earth. So the mystery evolves. It stops being a question of one civilization's genius and becomes a question of shared human behavior or shared human memory. Why did so many distant cultures build upward in the same sacred geometry? Why did they align to stars, cardinal directions, and cycles of time? Why do some sites feel openly celebrated, while others feel quietly buried? And if the pyramids of China truly remain hidden beneath soil and forest, then a new possibility emerges. Perhaps the global pyramid story did not begin in one place. Perhaps it began long before any modern border existed. Perhaps the pyramid is not an Egyptian invention at all, but a fragment of something older, copied and reinterpreted by different civilizations across ages. If that is even partly true, then the sands of Giza are not the beginning. They are the visible tip of a much deeper structure, a structure made of questions. And now, as we leave Egypt behind, the trail moves east, into a landscape where the monuments are not standing in the open for every camera to capture. They are sleeping beneath fields, beneath trees, beneath silence. Because whatever lies beneath those hidden hills may hold the key to the one question that refuses to die. Who first built the pyramids of the world? And why did they build them in the first place? If you want, I can extend this into the next 12-minute episode as a direct continuation, moving into China with the same tone, then linking it into Indonesia and the Americas to complete the global network arc. High in the misty hills of West Java sits a site that appears ordinary at first glance, a simple grassy mound rising from the earth. Fog drifts through the trees. Wind moves softly across the slopes. Birds call from a distance. To an outsider, it looks like nothing more than a hill. But for the locals, it has never been just another hill. They call it Gunung Padang, meaning mountain of enlightenment. For countless generations, people have believed it to be a sacred place built by their ancient ancestors long before the great floods spoken of in legend. Not a shrine made for a season, but a monument made for time itself. A place meant to last when everything else was erased. When Dutch explorers first arrived in 1914, they immediately noticed something that did not belong to nature's randomness. The hill was covered in rows of massive stone blocks, arranged in step terraces. These stones were not scattered like storm debris or a volcanic collapse. They were laid in lines. Many were shaped like columns. They formed symmetrical layers that climbed upward, guiding the eye to the peak like a staircase made by intention. For decades, archaeologists assumed it was simple. They believed the hill was natural and that early people merely built a small ceremonial site on its top, using the stones that were already there. A shrine, a sacred mound, a place of ritual, not a place of engineering. That idea stood largely unchallenged for nearly 100 years, repeated in reports and textbooks, filed away as solved. But Gunung Padang never felt solved to the people who lived near it. They carried stories that did not match the neat academic label. Stories of ancestors who knew the earth. Stories of builders who worked with stone, as if it were language. Stories of a time before disaster, when the world was different, and knowledge was not yet broken into pieces. Then, in the early 2010s, everything changed. A new wave of researchers came to Gunung Padang with modern tools and a determination to look deeper, not just at the terraces visible on the surface, but inside the hill itself. Because there is a difference between seeing stones on a hill and asking the forbidden question. What if the hill is not a hill? What if it is a structure wearing the disguise of nature? Using ground-penetrating radar, core drilling, and seismic imaging, teams began mapping what lay beneath. The early results were not subtle. Beneath the visible terraces were signs of buried layers. Not one layer, multiple, stacked like chapters in a stone book, each one sealed under centuries of soil and volcanic ash. The scans revealed voids, cavities, and geometric patterns that did not look like random fractures. They looked engineered. They looked designed. And the deeper the instruments read, the stranger the picture became. It was as if Gunung Padang had been built in phases, one generation adding to the work of another, expanding, reinforcing, reshaping, and burying the earlier layers beneath new construction. The surface terraces were no longer the main story. They were the most recent page. When researchers carbon-dated organic material trapped inside the layers, the numbers that came back were explosive. Some samples suggested ages reaching deep into prehistory, into periods that feel almost unreachable. Even more cautious readings suggested dates around 14,000 BC, a time long before Egypt's pyramids, long before the first cities of Mesopotamia, long before the world we assume we recognize. If those dates are accurate, the implications are enormous. It would mean that people were cutting stone, shaping blocks, and constructing terraces at a time when mainstream history often describes humanity as scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. It would mean large-scale building was not a late development of civilization. It could mean civilization itself began earlier and then vanished. The discovery did not simply spark controversy, it ignited it. Geologists responded quickly. Many argued that Gunung Padang is a volcanic hill, naturally formed, with ancient people modifying only its uppermost layers. They pointed to the region's volcanic history and to the way lava can fracture into column-like blocks that resemble cut stones. They argued that deeper layers could be natural formations interpreted too generously as construction. In other words, nature created the foundation and humans only decorated the top. But the excavation team leading the work disagreed. To them, the arrangement of stones, the repeated layering, and the patterns revealed by imaging suggested deliberate placement. They did not see randomness. They saw structure, layer upon layer. Like an ancient project paused, buried, and restarted, the debate grew beyond Indonesia because Gunung Padang touches a global nerve. It sits in the same category as other controversial sites where the timeline feels unstable, places where dates do not behave, places where the ground itself seems to contradict what we have been taught. Some scientists dismissed the entire idea as pseudo-archaeology. Others admitted that even if part of the data held true, it would force new questions about early human capability. And then there were the legends. The Sundanese people have carried stories for centuries about a great kingdom that once thrived in this region, ruled by wise ancestors who possessed knowledge long lost. Their tales speak of cataclysm, of a flood or a disaster that destroyed their world, leaving only certain stones behind. Not just any stones, but sacred stones, placed where memory could cling even when time wiped clean. To the people of West Java, Gunung Padang is not an archaeological argument. It is inheritance. It is a surviving fragment of a forgotten story. Standing atop the terraces, one can feel why the site holds such power. The stones are enormous, many weighing several tons. They are aligned in a way that feels deliberate. Each terrace rises like a step in an immense staircase. The layers are orderly. The summit feels like a destination, not an accident. And when you look down, the terraces form an arrangement that seems too clean to be explained by erosion alone. It feels like a place built to be climbed, a place built for gathering, a place built for watching the sky. And that last point matters because the deeper mystery of pyramids and stepped monuments is not only their construction, it is their obsession with position and alignment. Across the world, pyramid-like structures are often linked to the heavens. They track seasons, they mark solstices, they mirror constellations, they serve as bridges between the ground and the sky. So the question rises again, heavier this time. If Gunung Padang is truly that old, what was its purpose? Was it a temple? Was it a ceremonial platform? Was it a calendar? Or was it something more fundamental, something built by people who feared forgetting? Consider the environment around Gunung Padang. Volcanic lands are unstable. They erupt, collapse, and reshape the ground. Forests grow fast, swallowing structures. Earthquakes fracture stone. Floods carve valleys. In such a landscape, building something that lasts would require not only labor but planning. It would require knowledge of stone placement, weight distribution, and resilience. And that brings us to a strange possibility. What if the builders were not primitive at all? What if they were survivors? Because there is a consistent theme that appears across many cultures. A time of catastrophe, a flood, a collapse, a reset, a world wiped clean. After such an event, knowledge becomes rare and sacred. Survivors rebuild with fragments. They encode what they can into what lasts the longest, stone. If Gunung Padang was built in phases, it could mean that people returned to it again and again, each era repairing, expanding, and sealing older layers beneath newer ones. That would explain why the site feels like stacked history. It would also explain why dating results could vary dramatically depending on what layer is tested. But it raises another unsettling possibility. What if the oldest layers do not belong to the same culture that built the visible terraces? What if the terraces we see are a later civilization's attempt to reclaim something far older, something already ancient when they arrived? This pattern appears elsewhere. In many places, later cultures build atop older foundations, sometimes copying shapes without fully understanding them. They inherit the monument and rewrite its meaning. They adapt it to new gods and new rituals, while the original purpose becomes myth. If that is happening at Gunung Padang, then the mound is not a single story. It is a library of eras. And if that is true, then it becomes one of the most important sites on Earth. Not because of a single date, but because it suggests something broader. That human history is layered, not linear, layered. Now step back and look at the global network. Egypt has pyramids. The Americas have pyramids. China has pyramid-like mounds. Bosnia has controversial pyramid claims. Indonesia has this terraced giant hidden in mist. We are told these cultures developed separately, independently, each inventing their own sacred architecture. That could be true. Humans can arrive at similar solutions. A pyramid is stable. A terraced mound is practical. Stones are available. Religion demands monuments, but coincidence starts to weaken when the patterns repeat in deeper ways. When monuments align to cardinal directions, when they track celestial cycles, when they are tied to flood myths, when the oldest layers may reach back to periods mainstream history struggles to accommodate. The idea that pyramid building originated in Egypt has always been treated as a settled point for most people. Egypt's pyramids are famous. They are visible. They dominate the story. But fame is not proof of origin. Visibility is not proof of beginning. Gunung Padang forces us to consider an alternative, that the impulse to build these structures may have existed earlier, in other places, and may have traveled through memory, migration, or shared legacy. Perhaps pyramid building did not originate in Egypt or the Americas after all. Perhaps it began here, in the lush volcanic heart of Indonesia, at a time when sea levels were lower and the world's coastlines were different. At a time when regions now separated by water could have been connected by land bridges and ancient pathways. At a time when the Ice Age was loosening its grip and the planet was entering chaos. Because around that time, enormous changes were happening. Ice sheets melted, oceans rose, climatescapes drowned, entire regions vanished beneath water. If any early societies existed along ancient coastlines, many of their cities would now lie hidden beneath the sea. And if coastal civilizations vanished, survivors might have moved inland, carrying fragments of knowledge and sacred architecture into higher ground, into places like these hills. Gunung Padang is high. It is inland. It is elevated above floods, almost as if it was built with survival in mind. Now imagine what that means for the pyramid story. If the earliest terraced pyramids were built in a world before the flood legends, and if later civilizations inherited the idea, then Egypt's pyramids could represent not the beginning, but the refinement. The ultimate expression of an older blueprint, a concept sharpened into precision over millennia, until it reached monumental perfection on the Giza Plateau. In that framing, Gunung Padang becomes the origin spark, a forgotten prototype of a global idea, and Egypt becomes the masterpiece that survived in the open. Now the mist fades and the sands come into view, and the question grows louder. If Gunung Padang might be the oldest pyramid ever built, then what lies in Egypt could represent the point where the idea reached its peak. The moment where geometry, astronomy, and stone aligned into a structure so precise it still challenges modern explanation. But there is one more detail that makes this mystery feel less like academic debate and more like an unfolding adventure. The scans at Gunung Padang suggested voids, cavities, possibly chambers. And throughout history, chambers inside ancient monuments are rarely empty by accident. Chambers are where memory is stored. Chambers are where rituals take place. Chambers are where knowledge is hidden when people fear it will be destroyed. If Gunung Padang contains sealed spaces deep within its oldest layers, then the site is not only ancient, it may still be unread. And that is why the controversy matters, because the argument is not only about dates, it is about access. It is about whether humanity is ready to dig into a story that might disrupt everything we believe about our beginnings. What if the hill is hiding evidence of planning, of organized labor, of early engineering? What if it holds traces of a culture that should not exist according to the timeline? Or what if it holds something even more unsettling, not a treasure, but a clue, a blueprint, a message left by builders who knew disaster was coming and wanted something to survive it? Gunung Padang stands there silent in the mist, holding its layers close. It refuses to be simplified. It refuses to be a footnote. And that is why it belongs in the Forbidden Fathoms Trail. Because it is not only a site, it is a threshold, a place where history begins to feel less like a straight road and more like a labyrinth filled with sealed doors. And once you accept that the labyrinth is real, the adventure changes. Now Egypt is not simply a wonder. China is not simply a rumor. Bosnia is not simply a controversy. They become connected points on a map that someone may have drawn long ago. A global pattern of stone and sky. A network of monuments that might be telling one story in different languages. A story about cycles, about catastrophe, about knowledge, about survival. So as we leave the misty terraces of Indonesia behind, and the sands of Egypt rise again in the distance, remember what Gunung Padang suggests, that the pyramid story may be older than we have dared to admit. And if it is older, then the next question is unavoidable. If the first builders were real, where did they go? What happened to them? And what else did they leave behind? Because somewhere between the volcanic hills of Java and the stone giants of Giza, a hidden chapter of human history is waiting. And the deeper we dig, the more it feels like the world has been here before. In the 1940s, an American pilot named James Gaussman was flying over central China on what was supposed to be an ordinary mission. The war had pushed pilots across regions few outsiders had ever seen, and much of the land below him felt ancient and untouched. The landscape stretched endlessly beneath his wings, a patchwork of fields, rivers, and settlements that had remained largely unchanged for millennia. But somewhere over the plains of Shaanxi province, something broke the monotony of clouds and fields. Far below, catching the sunlight, stood a structure that should not have been there. Gaussman saw a vast white form rising from the earth. It was not jagged like a mountain. It was not rounded like a hill. It had clean edges, straight lines, symmetry. From the air, it looked unmistakably artificial. The geometric precision was undeniable, even from altitude. This was not a natural formation shaped by erosion and time. This was something built with intention. Curious and unsettled, he circled back, lowering his altitude to get a clearer look. What he saw only deepened the shock. It was a pyramid, not a small one, not a rough mound, but something enormous, something so large that Gaussman later estimated it to be nearly twice the height of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Its surface appeared pale, almost glowing, as if covered in stone or clay that reflected the sun. It stood alone, dominating the surrounding landscape like a monument from another age. The structure appeared pristine from above, its white surface catching the light in a way that made it seem almost deliberately placed as a beacon. Gaussman later described feeling a sense of displacement, as if he had stumbled upon something from a different world entirely. The pyramid seemed out of place, not just geographically, but temporally, as though it belonged to an era that predated everything he knew about Chinese history. When Gaussman landed, he reported what he had seen. He filed his account with military authorities, describing the location as precisely as his flight instruments and memory allowed. He sketched what he remembered. He insisted on the measurements. The account was noted, filed, and then quietly forgotten. The Second World War was ending. Attention shifted, priorities changed. His sighting became a footnote, dismissed as a misinterpretation or an exaggeration. A pilot's imagination stretched thin by long hours in the air. The official response followed a familiar pattern. Dismiss. Move on. Gaussman's report joined countless other wartime observations that never received proper investigation. In the chaos of the immediate post-war period, with nations rebuilding and borders redrawing, a single pilot's claim about a mysterious pyramid in China seemed irrelevant to the pressing concerns of the day. For decades, the story lingered at the edge of mystery circles, resurfacing occasionally in obscure articles and whispered discussions. Amateur researchers would occasionally reference Gaussman's account, but without photographic evidence or coordinates precise enough to verify, the White Pyramid remained in the realm of unconfirmed sightings. Most people assumed it was a myth. Some suggested he had seen a natural formation under unusual lighting conditions. Others proposed he had misidentified a known structure. perhaps exaggerating its size in the confusion of flight until technology caught up. In the 1990s, satellite imagery began revealing details of China's interior that had never been widely seen before. As commercial satellite technology improved and became available to civilian researchers, new eyes turned toward regions previously accessible only to governments and military intelligence. Analysts studying the region around the ancient city of Sean noticed something strange. Scattered across the plains were dozens of pyramid-shaped mounds. Some were massive, others were smaller, but all shared one thing in common. They were geometric. They had defined edges. They were oriented with precision. The discovery was gradual but undeniable. As different analysts examined satellite data independently, the same pattern emerged. What had been dismissed as natural hills or unremarkable landscape features revealed themselves, from the perspective of orbital altitude, to be unmistakably artificial structures. The geometric consistency was too regular. The orientations are too precise. The clustering is too deliberate. Over 100 pyramid-shaped structures were identified across Shaanxi province. Many were located near ancient imperial capitals. The distribution pattern suggested purpose rather than random placement. Some formed alignments. Others appeared clustered around specific geographic features. The sheer number was staggering. Suddenly, Gaussmann's White Pyramid no longer sounded like fantasy. It sounded like something that had been hiding in plain sight. Researchers began comparing these structures to known pyramids elsewhere in the world. The proportions matched. The orientation to cardinal directions matched. The relationship to astronomical features matched. Everything about these formations suggested they were part of the same global phenomenon archaeologists had documented in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and other locations, except these pyramids existed in a region where, according to conventional history, such monumental architecture should not exist in these forms or at this scale. The excitement did not last long. As interest grew, access began to shrink. Researchers attempting to visit the sites found permits denied. International archaeological teams submitted proposals for excavation and were rejected without clear explanation. Independent studies were blocked through bureaucratic obstacles and regulatory barriers. Official statements insisted that these formations were nothing more than natural hills or simple burial mounds from historical dynasties. Nothing unusual, nothing to investigate. The pattern of restriction became a story in itself. Universities that expressed interest in collaborative research found their communications going unanswered. Journalists seeking to visit the sites discovered that the necessary travel permits were suddenly unavailable. The areas around the pyramids were designated as protected zones, but not protected in the way archaeological sites typically are. These sites were protected from investigation, not through preservation. Satellite images of certain areas were blurred or limited. Requests for higher resolution imagery were denied or redirected. Online discussions faded as Chinese internet regulations made the topic increasingly difficult to research or discuss publicly. Academic curiosity met a wall of silence that seemed coordinated and deliberate. To this day, officials maintain that the sites are protected cultural relics, sealed off not out of secrecy but preservation. They argue that excavation could damage fragile heritage. That explanation sounds reasonable on the surface, but it raises a deeper question. What exactly is being preserved? Visitors who have managed to glimpse some of these pyramids describe something unsettling. Several appear to have been deliberately concealed. Forests were planted over them. Trees softened their outlines. In some cases, the sharp edges seem intentionally rounded, as if the structures were being encouraged to disappear back into the landscape. The concealment appears systematic rather than accidental. Aerial photographs from different decades show progressive covering of certain structures, where once geometric shapes were clearly visible. Later images show increasingly dense vegetation. Some researchers have documented what appears to be deliberate agricultural planning that obscures pyramid outlines, with crops planted in patterns that break up the geometric clarity of the underlying structures. Local farmers working the land speak carefully when asked about the mounds. Some families have worked the same fields for generations, planting on and around these hills without questioning their origin. When pressed, some acknowledge the unusual nature of the shapes. Others repeat official explanations about burial mounds. A few speak in more guarded terms about ancestors who remembered when some structures were more visible, before trees were planted or earth was added to soften the angles. Yet where angles remain visible, the geometry is striking. These pyramids are aligned to the cardinal directions, much like those at Giza. Their bases are square, their orientation is precise. When researchers plotted the locations of the largest pyramids on a map, another pattern emerged. Some align with Orion's belt, the same constellation associated with rebirth, afterlife, and cosmic order in ancient Egypt appears mirrored across the world in China. Two civilizations separated by vast distances and cultures, yet seemingly guided by the same sky. The Orion correlation is particularly troubling for conventional chronology. If Chinese pyramid builders incorporated the same stellar alignments as Egyptian pyramid builders, it suggests either contact between civilizations or inheritance from a common source. Neither option fits comfortably within the established timeline of isolated cultural development. The alternative explanation, that both civilizations independently chose the same constellation and built similar monuments with similar alignments by pure coincidence, strains probability to its breaking point. Official narratives describe the Chinese pyramids as imperial tombs built to house emperors and protect their treasures. That explanation fits known examples, especially the most famous one of all, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. His burial mound rises above the plains near Shan, guarded by the terracotta army. Thousands of life-size soldiers frozen in time, each face unique, each figure positioned with military precision. The discovery of the terracotta army in 1974 by local farmers digging a well stunned the archaeological world. It proved that ancient accounts of Qin's tomb complex were not exaggerated. If anything, they were understated. Ancient records describe his underground palace as something extraordinary. Rivers of mercury flowing through chambers, ceilings decorated to represent the stars, a miniature universe sealed beneath the earth, crossbows rigged to fire at intruders, precious stones representing celestial bodies, a cosmos recreated in stone and metal beneath the ground. For centuries, those descriptions were dismissed as legend, poetic exaggeration, the kind of mythology that accumulates around powerful rulers. Surely no one could actually construct rivers of flowing mercury underground. Surely the accounts were symbolic rather than literal. Then modern science stepped in. Soil tests around Qin Shi Huang's tomb revealed abnormally high levels of mercury. Not traces. Concentrations far beyond what should naturally occur. Multiple independent tests confirmed the readings. The mercury contamination was real, extensive, and consistent with the ancient descriptions of underground rivers. The legend was not symbolic, it was literal. This confirmation forced archaeologists to reconsider other ancient accounts previously dismissed as impossible or fanciful. If the mercury rivers were real, what else might be real? The mechanized crossbows, the astronomical ceiling, the precious stones and exotic materials described in historical texts. The tomb remains unexcavated, officially out of concern for preservation and the dangers posed by mercury contamination. But its existence proves that ancient Chinese engineering capabilities exceeded modern assumptions. Even more surprising, similar mercury anomalies have been detected near other pyramid mounds in the region. The pattern suggests this was not a one-time indulgence of a single emperor. It appears to be part of a broader tradition, or perhaps something inherited. The distribution of mercury traces across multiple sites raises uncomfortable questions. Did multiple emperors independently decide to incorporate mercury into their tombs? Or were they following a template, a tradition established long before their reigns? And if it was a tradition, where did it originate? Mercury is toxic, dangerous to mine and work with. Its use requires sophisticated understanding of its properties and risks. Why would this specific material become central to imperial burial practices across centuries? Mercury was not chosen randomly. In ancient thought, it symbolized immortality, transformation, and cosmic flow. It moves like liquid metal, reflecting light like a mirror. It behaves in ways that would have seemed almost magical to early observers. In Taoist alchemy, Mercury represented the volatile principle, the transformative force that could lead to immortality. In Chinese cosmology, it was associated with the planet Mercury, with communication between realms, with the fluidity between life and death. Why would multiple pyramids contain traces of it? And why would such dangerous material be used repeatedly if the structures were only symbolic graves? The mercury suggests purpose beyond mere burial. It suggests belief in functional properties, whether spiritual or material. Ancient texts speak of mercury as having protective qualities, as being capable of preserving not just bodies but souls. Some accounts describe it as a medium through which the deceased could navigate the afterlife. Others hint at more practical applications, suggesting Mercury could power certain mechanisms or maintain specific atmospheric conditions. Modern researchers have noted that mercury vapors can preserve organic materials under certain conditions. Its antimicrobial properties are well documented. Its ability to form amalgams with precious metals made it crucial for ancient metalworking. But the quantities described in imperial tombs far exceed any practical preservation needs. The amounts suggest something more ambitious, something that required mercury not as a preservative but as a medium, as an active component in a system we no longer understand. The question circles back to Gaussmann's White Pyramid. Despite decades of searching, its exact identity remains unresolved. Some researchers argue that Gaussmann misidentified the Maling Mausoleum or another large imperial tomb. The Maling burial site of Emperor Wu of Han is indeed massive and could appear white under certain lighting conditions when covered with limestone or after rainfall. Others believe he saw something far larger than any officially acknowledged structure. Something that may have since been buried, camouflaged, or even reshaped to avoid attention. The discrepancy in size descriptions remains problematic for the misidentification theory. Gaussmann described a structure approximately 300 meters tall, dwarfing the largest known imperial tomb. Even accounting for perspective distortion from altitude or errors in estimation, the size he reported exceeds known structures by such a margin that simple misidentification seems unlikely. Either Gaussmann grossly exaggerated, or he saw something that has not been publicly acknowledged. Its absence from detailed records is strange. If such a massive structure existed and still exists, why is it barely mentioned? Why does it not appear clearly in public archaeological catalogues? The Chinese government maintains extensive records of historical sites and monuments. The absence of a structure matching Gaussmann's description from these catalogues is notable. Either it never existed, or its existence is being deliberately obscured. Some researchers have proposed that the White Pyramid was not stone at all, but a natural formation covered in white clay or salt deposits that gave it the appearance of a constructed monument. The Qaidam Basin and other regions in China contain geological formations that can appear strikingly geometric. However, this explanation fails to account for Gaussmann's specific descriptions of artificial edges and deliberate symmetry. When questioned directly in the late 1990s, Chinese officials responded with a carefully worded statement. They said there were no pyramids in Shaanxi, only pyramid-shaped hills. It was an answer that closed the door without locking it. The phrasing is revealing. Pyramid-shaped hills acknowledges the geometry while denying the artificiality. It is a semantic distinction that avoids direct engagement with the evidence. Natural hills can be pyramid-shaped, but natural hills are rarely aligned to cardinal directions. Natural hills do not typically cluster in patterns that suggest planning. Natural hills do not usually contain mercury anomalies or symmetrical underground chambers. If the government's goal was simply conservation, the secrecy might make sense. Ancient sites do require protection from looting and environmental damage. Controlled access is often necessary to preserve fragile materials, but many believe the situation is more complicated. Discovering pyramids that rival or predate Egypt's would not only reshape China's history, it would reshape human history. It would challenge the idea that monumental architecture emerged independently and late. Such a revelation would ripple outward, affecting timelines, migrations, and the story of civilization itself. The implications extend beyond archaeology into national identity and historical narrative. China's official history traces an unbroken line of civilization stretching back thousands of years. This continuity is central to Chinese cultural identity. The discovery of monuments predating the accepted timeline could disrupt this narrative in unpredictable ways. It might suggest forgotten civilizations, lost dynasties, or cultural influences from unexpected sources. Any of these possibilities would require rewriting not just Chinese history, but the relationships between ancient civilizations across Asia and beyond. So why not excavate? Ground-penetrating surveys have already suggested tunnels and symmetrical chambers beneath several mounds, features that rarely occur naturally. The surveys, conducted by both Chinese and international teams in earlier decades before access became restricted, revealed geometric voids consistent with constructed chambers. In some cases, the scans suggested multiple levels, staircases, and interconnected passages. If these were merely tombs, controlled excavation could confirm it. Instead, they remain sealed. Some theorists believe the reason is simple. What lies inside does not fit the accepted timeline. The possibility that Chinese pyramids predate accepted chronology is not merely speculative. Erosion patterns on some structures suggest extreme age, Weathering that should take millennia is visible on certain monuments. Trees growing on pyramid slopes have been dated to several hundred years old, but they grow from soil deposits that accumulated over the structure, suggesting the pyramid itself is far older than the trees. Geological analysis of some mounds indicates they may have been exposed to climatic conditions that existed only during much earlier periods. There is also evidence suggesting that some pyramids may have been deliberately buried, their edges softened, their surfaces covered. Whether this was done by ancient builders seeking to protect them or by modern authorities seeking to minimize attention is unknown. But the result is the same. The monuments vanish beneath camouflage. Historical texts occasionally reference ancient mounds or sacred mountains in ways that suggest they were already ancient when the texts were written. Some accounts describe earlier dynasties conducting rituals at sites whose origins were already lost to memory. These references hint at a deeper history, layers of civilization beneath the recognized dynasties, builders whose names are no longer remembered, but whose works remain. As researchers connect the dots, the pattern grows harder to ignore. Repeating geometry across continents, stellar alignments shared between distant cultures, Mercury traces suggesting advanced symbolic and technical knowledge, a consistent reluctance to excavate deeply. All of it points toward an interconnected architectural tradition that does not sit comfortably within the standard narrative. The Chinese pyramids are not isolated anomalies. They fit within a global pattern that includes Egypt, Sudan, Mesoamerica, Indonesia, and possibly Bosnia. Each region shows similar characteristics: geometric precision, astronomical alignment, resistance to investigation. The consistency is remarkable. The explanations remain inadequate. If independent invention explains the global distribution of pyramids, we must accept that dozens of separate cultures, across thousands of years and thousands of miles, all chose the same geometric form for their most important monuments. All incorporated similar astronomical alignments. All used similar construction techniques at similar scales. The probability of this occurring by chance is astronomically small. The alternative is shared origin, either through direct contact, through inheritance from a parent civilization, or through memory of a common architectural tradition. Any of these options disrupts the accepted model of isolated cultural development, yet the silence continues. The Chinese pyramids remain untouched, aging quietly beneath forests and farmland. Official explanations remain brief and unchanging. No new excavations, no comprehensive public studies, no clear answers, only denial. And that denial has consequences, because when one of the world's most powerful nations keeps its pyramids hidden, it sets a precedent. It shapes how other discoveries are treated. When another country uncovers something similar and claims it challenges history, the response is immediate, impossible, unscientific, dismissed. The Chinese approach to its pyramids influences global archaeological politics. If China, with its advanced technology and extensive resources, refuses to excavate structures within its borders, it provides cover for other nations to do the same. It normalizes the restriction of research. It establishes that some sites can remain perpetually under study, without actual study occurring. It creates a model where preservation becomes indistinguishable from concealment. The question then becomes unavoidable. If pyramids exist across the world, and if some of them are being quietly buried by time or by choice, how many chapters of human history are missing? And if the White Pyramid truly stood there, gleaming in the sunlight, larger than Giza, what does that say about the civilization that built it? Perhaps the greatest mystery is not what lies beneath these pyramids. It is why so many of them are being left unread. The decision to leave monuments unexcavated is not neutral. It is an active choice with consequences. Each decade that passes sees weathering and degradation continue. Agricultural activity damages subsurface structures. Natural erosion slowly erases details. Whatever information these pyramids contain becomes harder to recover with each passing year. The decision not to excavate is effectively a decision to allow information to be lost. Why would any government choose information loss over discovery? The answers are complex. Political considerations, cultural sensitivities, economic priorities, and genuine conservation concerns all play roles. But beneath these practical considerations lies a deeper question. What if the discoveries would be too disruptive? What if the information contained in these monuments contradicts not just Chinese history, but the entire framework through which we understand human development? Because once stone starts telling a story that does not match the books, someone has to decide which voice matters more, and history has shown that the ground does not care about permission. Eventually, it reveals what it holds. Natural erosion will continue regardless of bureaucratic decisions. Farmers will continue plowing fields around pyramid bases. Landslides and earthquakes will eventually expose buried chambers. Satellite technology will continue improving, revealing details that current restrictions cannot hide. The information is not destroyed by concealment, it is merely delayed. The only question is whether humanity will be ready when it does. Will we have the frameworks to understand what is revealed? Will we have moved beyond rigid chronologies that cannot accommodate anomalous data? Will we have developed the intellectual flexibility to revise our understanding when evidence demands it? Or will we continue defending outdated models, explaining away each discovery, maintaining narratives that fit our assumptions rather than our evidence? The Chinese pyramids stand as both monuments and questions. They mark the landscape physically while marking the boundaries of accepted knowledge. They are present yet restricted, visible yet denied, known yet unknown. They wait, as pyramids have always waited, for the moment when humanity becomes ready to hear what they have to say. Now here is the mystery of the US starting. Hidden in the arid valleys along Peru's coast lies one of humanity's most neglected wonders. The landscape feels silent, almost empty, as if nothing important could ever happen there. But that is exactly why Caral is so unsettling. It does not announce itself like Egypt. It does not tower over the world's imagination like Giza. It simply exists weathered and quiet, holding its secrets in plain sight. Long before most people ever heard the word pyramid, the people of Caral were already shaping them. This ancient city, dated to around 2600 BC, stands among the oldest known urban civilizations in the Americas. It is not a village. It is not a scattered settlement. It is a planned city, complete with monumental architecture. At its heart are tiered pyramids, plazas, and carefully arranged ceremonial platforms that look less like primitive experimentation and more like intentional design. What makes Caral even stranger is what it does not contain. Archaeologists have found no weapons, no fortifications, no defensive walls, no clear signs of war. In a world where many early societies rose through conflict, Caral appears to have grown through something else: trade, organization, ritual, knowledge. Instead of building armies, they built ceremonial centers. Instead of erecting walls, they raised platforms and staircases. Instead of leaving behind stories of conquest, they left behind spaces designed for gatherings, music, and sacred performance. And this changes everything, because it reframes the pyramid. In Caral, pyramids do not feel like monuments of domination. They feel like monuments of preservation. As if the goal was not to intimidate enemies, but to anchor something fragile that could be lost. Their plazas were designed for mass assembly. Their terraces were aligned with intention. The city layout suggests an awareness of seasons, cycles, and perhaps the movement of the sky. Even the way sound travels in these open ceremonial areas hints at planning. Not modern acoustics, but an intuitive understanding of how space shapes experience. Then come the quipu chords, knotted threads and colored strings that functioned as recording tools, storing information through patterns and structure. Alongside them were musical instruments, flutes and sound makers that speak of ritual performance and communal ceremonies. Researchers also found evidence of extensive trade networks, reaching hundreds of kilometers across the region. This was not an isolated experiment. This was a connected civilization, peaceful, organized, and far ahead of what most people imagine for its time. And then, without warning, Caral fades. No clear invasion, no obvious destruction, no definitive explanation. The city declines and disappears into history's blind spot. We know it existed. We know it mattered. We know it is shaped like pyramids. But we do not fully know where its builders came from, or why their civilization dissolved. And that mystery is the first door, because thousands of years later, far to the north, a second door appears wider and more terrifying. In Mexico's highlands stands one of the most astonishing sights ever uncovered: Teotihuacan. When the Aztecs arrived long after it had been abandoned, they were stunned. They were so awed by its scale and presence that they called it the place where men become gods. They believed it was sacred ground, a city built by powers beyond ordinary humanity. But here is the disturbing part. The Aztecs did not build it. No one knows who did. Teotihuacan was already ancient when they found it, already filled with towering pyramids, already laid out with a precision that feels almost modern. The city plan is not random. It is not organic growth. It is engineered. Its central road, the Avenue of the Dead, cuts perfectly straight through the city for more than 2 kilometers. It links the Pyramid of the Moon to the colossal Pyramid of the Sun. a structure so massive it dwarfs the expectations of most visitors, who arrive thinking they have seen big pyramids before. The Pyramid of the Sun is so large that people often compare it to Giza and feel a jolt. It could contain the Great Pyramid of Egypt with room to spare, and then comes a detail that turns architecture into something else entirely. The entire city is tilted not by accident, but with measurable consistency. It sits about 5 degrees off true north. Researchers have proposed different reasons. Some connect it to solar cycles, some connect it to stellar events, some connect it to the movement of constellations that were sacred to the people who lived there. The builders may have tracked the Pleiades. They may have tracked Orion. They may have embedded a cosmic calendar into the city itself. And whether every theory is correct or not, the underlying reality remains. Teotihuacan was built with the sky in mind. Even the sound behaves strangely there. Clap at the right spot near certain stairways and the echo returns with a sharp, bird-like quality. Many visitors describe it as resembling the cry of the Quetzal, a sacred bird in Mesoamerican symbolism. Some argue this is a coincidence. Others argue it is deliberate design, an acoustic effect engineered into sacred space. And here is why that matters. Because it implies a knowledge of vibration, a knowledge of how structure and sound interact. It implies the builders did not just stack stones, they shaped experience. They created spaces that spoke back to you. And yet, for all this sophistication, Teotihuacan left no clear written language that tells us who they were. No definitive identity, no single name carved into stone saying, "We built this." Instead, they left geometry, they left alignment, they left a city that feels like a message without words, which raises the same unsettling question we encountered at Carol. Who taught them? Or what did they inherit? Because knowledge like this rarely appears in isolation. It usually develops step by step, recorded and improved. But Teotihuacan feels like it arrives already complete, as if its builders were drawing from a template older than themselves. Then the trail deepens, into the jungles of Guatemala. There, hidden beneath dense canopy and endless green, lies El Mirador, one of the largest ancient cities ever discovered, still mostly unexcavated. From the air, the jungle looks uniform. From the ground, it feels endless. And that is why El Mirador stayed hidden for so long. The forest swallowed it, turning pyramids into hills, staircases into slopes, plazas into clearings that no one recognized for what they truly were. Its greatest structure, the Danta Pyramid, is the largest pyramid by volume in the world. It contains more material than all 3 pyramids of Giza combined. That fact alone sounds impossible until you see the numbers and the scale. Standing at its base does not feel like standing beside a building. It feels like standing beside a piece of the landscape that has been cut and shaped into a monument. El Mirador dates to around 1000 BC in many accounts, but even that does not solve the deeper mystery. Its precision suggests planning beyond what people expect for that era. Its alignment connects to solstices and equinoxes. Its scale implies organization, labor coordination, and resource control on a level that once seemed unimaginable for early Mesoamerican societies. And then there are the roads. Archaeologists have found traces of causeways, a network of elevated roads connecting cities across huge distances. It resembles a highway system, engineered to cut through wetlands and forests, linking multiple centers in a coordinated framework that implies centralized planning, shared standards, and long-term vision. A civilization that thought not in years, but in centuries. So now the pattern becomes undeniable. Carol, peaceful and ancient, building pyramids for ritual and preservation. Teotihuacan, vast and mathematically designed, built by unknown hands aligned to the sky. El Mirador, colossal and hidden, connected by ancient roads, swallowing the idea that early societies were simple. 3 regions, 3 mysteries, 1 repeating architecture. And across the Americas, the myths begin to echo each other in a way that feels almost too consistent. The Inca spoke of Viracocha, a teacher figure who arrived after the catastrophe, bringing knowledge and order. The Maya and later traditions spoke of powerful beings connected to the heavens. In parts of Mesoamerica, the story of Quetzalcoatl appears, a civilizing figure linked to wisdom, agriculture, and sacred building. The details vary, the names change, but the pattern persists. A great disaster, a flood or world-ending event, then teachers appear. They bring knowledge, they help humans rebuild, then they vanish. Were these stories pure legend, or were they distorted memories of something real? It is not impossible that ancient coastal settlements were drowned as the last ice age ended. Sea levels rose dramatically over thousands of years. Regions that once held human life along coastlines would now be underwater. If early advanced cultures existed in those drowned zones, their ruins could be hidden beneath the ocean, beyond easy reach. Survivors could have migrated inland. They could have scattered. They could have carried fragments of old knowledge into new lands. And if that happened, it would explain something that has haunted researchers for generations. Why similar pyramid forms appear across continents. Why sacred geometry repeats. Why alignments to stars and cycles appear again and again. Because if knowledge was inherited rather than invented, then pyramids become more than architecture. They become memories. And that is where the Forbidden Fathoms story sharpens into something darker. These civilizations did not always claim to invent their wisdom. Many traditions speak of receiving it, of being taught, of learning from God's stars or ancestors who carried knowledge from another time. That is not how people talk when they believe they are the first. That is how people talk when they feel they are remembering. The architecture itself feels like remembrance, stepped shapes, stellar alignments, sacred proportions. It is as if builders were recreating a design that once existed in a purer form. A blueprint remembered, but never fully understood, repeated because it felt important, because it worked, because it anchored something essential. The pyramid becomes humanity's shared blueprint, rising wherever civilization rises, as if the shape itself is stitched into our collective instinct. Now stand in Teotihuacan and think of Giza. Stand in El Mirador and think of Gunung Padang. Stand in Caral and think of the earliest chapters of settlement. Different cultures, different languages, different gods, yet the same architectural truth, symmetry, alignment, precision, a relationship with the sky. The parallels are too strong to ignore. This is why the pyramid story refuses to remain local. It becomes global, it becomes a network. It suggests either contact, inheritance, or a deeper natural law that humans rediscovered repeatedly, like a mathematical secret embedded in reality itself. And here is the final sting. For every pyramid we can see, there may be many more we cannot. In the Amazon, new scanning technologies have begun revealing hidden structures beneath forest cover. In Mexico and Central America, countless mounds still wait beneath the jungle. Along coastlines, ancient drowned landscapes may still hold buried cities underwater. In deserts, sand can hide entire complexes for millennia. If so many monuments have survived above ground, how many more wait beneath the earth, unseen and forgotten? How many are still sleeping, holding the next clue? Because the monuments of the Americas are not just ruins. They are evidence. Evidence that civilization is older, more complex, and more connected than the official story suggests. And if these builders truly inherited knowledge from survivors of a lost world, then the most important chapter is still missing. Not the chapter of pyramids, but the chapter of the first teachers, the first engineers, the first astronomers, the people who understood geometry well enough to make it sacred. The people whose cities may now lie beneath oceans and forests, erased from view, but not erased from reality. What these monuments reveal is not only technical brilliance. They reveal a shared memory, a global echo of wisdom that refused to die. And the most dangerous idea of all is this. The pyramids might not be the beginning of civilization. They might be what was left behind after civilization fell. And if that is true, then the world is not discovering ruins. It is rediscovering a warning, a message written in stone, repeated across continents, waiting for the moment humanity becomes curious enough to read it. Because if the ancient builders hid their wisdom in pyramids, then they were not only building monuments, they were building time capsules. And somewhere out there, beneath jungle roots under desert sand, or beneath the cold floors of the sea, the next time capsule is still sealed, waiting. And once it is opened, the story of where this all began may finally stop being a mystery, or it may become something far more unsettling. When you stand before the pyramids of Giza, what captures you first is not only their massive size, it is their precision. The Great Pyramid feels less like a pile of stones and more like a single deliberate object, shaped by planning that does not forgive mistakes. Each side stretches more than 200 meters, yet the corners meet with an accuracy that would still impress modern builders. You are staring at a structure that should not exist in the era it is assigned to. Now picture what that really means. We are told the Great Pyramid contains about 2-3 million blocks. Most are limestone, some are granite, and many weigh around 2.5 tons each. Then there are the giants, the stones that push the story past the edge of comfort. blocks that weigh tens of tons, beams inside the king's chamber that are often described as reaching into the range of 80 tons. Even now, moving and placing a stone like that is a careful operation involving cranes, steel cables, modern rigging, engineering calculations, and teams trained not to make one fatal mistake. Yet the standard narrative asks you to accept a different picture. Copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden sleds, rope, human muscle. A civilization without iron tools, without modern cranes, without computers, without the kind of measuring instruments we rely on today. And if you run the math, the claim begins to creak. If the pyramid was completed in 20 years, then every stone needed to be quarried, shaped, transported, lifted, and set into place at an average pace that feels unreal. Roughly one block every couple of minutes, day and night without pause, for decades. Not only cutting and moving, but placing with alignment so exact that even a thin sheet of paper struggles to slip into the gaps between stones. This is where the story stops sounding like ancient patience and begins sounding like a logistical miracle. Because patience does not solve the hard part, precision does. Think about the outer casing stones, most of which are gone now. They once formed a smooth, shining skin around the pyramid. Accounts describe surfaces polished, so clean they reflected sunlight like mirrors. The joints were tight. The faces were aligned. The pyramid would have looked like a single gleaming mountain, not a stepped pile of blocks. Even with modern diamond tools, shaping granite with that consistency is slow and expensive work. Copper chisels, by contrast, are soft compared to granite. A copper edge dulls quickly, it deforms. It demands constant maintenance. That does not make granite cutting impossible, but it makes it painfully inefficient. So how did they do it? Most conventional explanations eventually dissolve into admiration. They were clever, they were organized, they had time, they were patient. But cleverness does not replace missing physics. The organization does not lift 80 tons. Time does not create perfect angles by itself. The pyramid's precision forces you to ask whether we are missing something. Not a magical secret, but a technique, a method, a missing tool or missing knowledge that does not appear clearly in surviving records. Modern attempts to recreate parts of the process have only added to the tension. In the 1990s, engineers and experimental archaeologists attempted to move limestone blocks using wooden sleds and ropes, sometimes lubricating sand with water to reduce friction. At small scale on controlled terrain with modern planning, it worked barely. The experiments proved something important. Ancient methods can move stone, but they also reveal a limit. Scaling is the problem. Moving a small block across level ground is one world. Moving millions of blocks, some weighing several tons, across rough terrain up ramps into precise placement without stopping is another world entirely. A world where small errors become catastrophic and where the margin for failure is constant. And then we return to the second mystery. How did they achieve that precision without modern measurement? Perfect 90-degree corners, straight lines over immense distance, near perfect alignment to cardinal directions. Many researchers note that the Great Pyramid's orientation to the north is astonishingly exact. That level of alignment demands more than basic sighting. It demands a reliable reference, either careful astronomical observation or techniques of surveying we do not fully understand in ancient context. The more you examine, the more you realize the Great Pyramid is not the only place where this problem appears. It is part of a global pattern. Because if Egypt was the only anomaly, we could treat it as a singular peak of human effort. But it is not. In Lebanon stands Baalbek, a site that feels like someone decided to test the limits of stone. The trilithon stones, fitted into the foundation of a massive temple platform, are among the largest blocks ever moved and set by human hands. Each is said to weigh around 800 tons. Nearby, in the quarry, lies an even larger block, sometimes described as surpassing 1,000 tons. The scale is staggering. A stone that heavy is not merely difficult to move. It becomes an engineering nightmare. Modern cranes can lift heavy loads, but weight is only one part of the problem. You also need space, stability, ground support, rigging capacity, safety margins, and careful placement. And yet those stones were not only shifted, they were placed with accuracy. Their alignment forms a foundation that has held for centuries. Now travel across the ocean to Bolivia, to Puma Punku, high above sea level where oxygen thins and weather bites hard. Here the mystery is not just size, it is detailed. Stones cut with angles so clean they look manufactured, grooves carved with consistency, interlocking shapes that resemble modular parts, holes drilled with repeated diameters, surfaces that appear flattened with a level of finish that feels too refined for stone hammers and copper tools. Pumapunku is often described as looking like architecture from another mindset. Not a rough temple, but a system of components, like the builders were thinking in terms of assembly, repeatability, and tight tolerances. Again, the mainstream view is that ancient people were capable of far more than we assume, and that skilled stone work can be achieved through patience and technique. That is true, but the question remains, why is the pattern so consistent across the world? Egypt, Lebanon, South America, enormous stones, extreme precision, monumental scale chosen even when smaller blocks would have been easier, faster, and safer. If you wanted a tomb, you could build it with manageable stone. If you wanted a temple, you could build it with manageable stone. Yet again and again, ancient engineers chose the almost impossible path, which suggests a possibility that is rarely said out loud. Maybe the challenge was the point, not for ego, for function. Because large stones behave differently than small stones. They resist seismic shifts better. They reduce the number of joints that can fail. They create stability that smaller blocks cannot match. A structure built with massive megaliths can endure earthquakes, erosion, and time in ways that lighter construction cannot. So one answer could be practical. They built on an impossible scale because they were building for endurance. But that practical answer leads to a darker question. Endurance against what? Now we arrive at the theories, the attempts to fill the gap between ancient tools and ancient results. Some researchers propose extensive water transport systems, canals, barges, seasonal flooding used as a natural highway. This makes sense for Egypt in particular, where the Nile could have been a moving road. Others suggest counterweight systems, ramps engineered with specific gradients, internal spiral passages, and clever mechanical advantages that reduce brute force. These ideas are not fantasy. They are engineers. They might explain how stones were moved, but they still struggle to explain the finish, the precision of joints, the polish, the repeated accuracy across millions of placements. That level of consistent workmanship implies either a workforce trained to extraordinary standards or a method of measurement and shaping that is not fully captured in what we know. And then there are the unconventional ideas. Not necessarily aliens, not necessarily supernatural intervention, but concepts that feel strange because modern people stopped thinking of them as practical. Sound, vibration, resonance. Ancient traditions across many cultures describe sound as a force connected to creation. In myth, the world begins with a word, a vibration, a cosmic tone. In certain traditions, the universe is described as a kind of echo, a structured wave. That sounds poetic, until you remember what modern physics says. Matter responds to vibration. Sound can move particles, shape patterns, and under specific conditions even cause objects to behave in unexpected ways. Modern experiments show that acoustic fields can suspend small particles. Frequencies can create standing waves. Resonance can amplify force. This does not mean sound could lift an 80-ton block like a feather. But it does mean that ancient builders could have explored methods of vibration to reduce friction, to settle stones into tighter placement, or to shape materials more effectively. Even today, vibration is used in construction. It is used to compact concrete, to settle foundations, to align heavy components. If ancient engineers discovered ways to use vibration practically, they could have gained advantages we do not usually include in the story. Is that proven? No, but neither is the idea that copper chisels alone were enough to produce mirror polish across huge granite surfaces on an industrial scale. At some point, the safe explanation begins to sound just as speculative as the alternative, because it asks you to accept extraordinary output from ordinary tools without an extraordinary method. And this is where the global pattern becomes the main clue. It is not just that one civilization built something impressive. It is that multiple civilizations, supposedly disconnected by oceans and time, built with matching traits. They used monumental stones. They achieved high precision. They embedded geometry, symmetry, and alignment. They treated architecture as if it carried knowledge. Either these civilizations independently rediscovered the same advanced principles again and again, or they inherited fragments of a shared tradition. And inheritance does not require a global empire. It does not require fantasy. It could be as simple as knowledge moving through trade migration, or survivors of earlier catastrophes carrying techniques forward. There is also another possibility, that the pyramid and the megalith are not inventions of one culture, but solutions written into nature itself. A pyramid is stable, a megalith is durable. Aligning to stars is the simplest way to measure time before mechanical clocks. Geometry is universal. A right angle is a right angle everywhere on Earth. So perhaps the reason these structures repeat is because reality itself pushes builders toward the same answers. But even if that is true, it still does not explain the extremes. Why the 80-ton beams? Why the 800-ton stones? Why the machine-like tolerances at Puma Punku? Why the obsession with making stone behave as if it were precision-engineered metal? That is why the suspicion persists that something about the ancient engineering story is missing. Not because the ancients were incapable. In fact, the opposite. Because the ancients were capable in ways we have not fully credited them for. And perhaps they had access to knowledge that later ages lost. Either a technique that died out, or a method that was never recorded openly, or a tradition kept within priesthoods, guilds, or elite builders whose secrets were guarded, or knowledge preserved in forms we have not decoded yet, hidden in measurements, alignments, and ratios. That brings us back to what these monuments might truly be. Not just tombs, not just temples, but messages. Messages written in the only material that reliably outlasts catastrophe: stone. Every perfect joint is a sentence. Every flawless angle is a symbol. Every alignment to the sky is a reminder that the builders were thinking beyond one lifetime. And if they were thinking beyond one lifetime, then we must ask what kind of world creates that mindset. A world that has already seen collapse. A world that knows memory can be erased. A world that builds as if the future will need proof. So what does all of this really tell us? It tells us that the ancient builders were not primitive. They were disciplined, intelligent, and in many cases astonishingly sophisticated. They understood leverage, geometry, organization, and material behavior at a level that still challenges our imagination. It also tells us that our standard explanations are incomplete. Not necessarily wrong in every detail, but incomplete. They leave gaps, they smooth over hard questions. They ask you to accept miracles of labor without fully explaining the miracle of precision. And once you admit that, the Forbidden Fathoms Trail becomes unavoidable. Because if Egypt, Baalbek, and Puma Punku each hold pieces of the same puzzle, then the puzzle is not local, it is global. It suggests that humanity, at some point, possessed a deeper understanding of stone, of measurement, and of the forces that shape matter. Maybe those secrets were lost after the catastrophe. Maybe they were guarded and then forgotten. Maybe they are still hidden beneath the earth, sealed in chambers we have not opened, waiting in places where excavation is restricted, ignored, or feared. But one thing becomes certain. These monuments were not random. They were not accidents. They were not crude experiments. They were deliberate statements, carved into the planet itself. And if they still stand after thousands of years, perfectly aligned, perfectly fitted, refusing to fall, then maybe they are still doing what they were built to do. Endure. Teach. Wait. Because perhaps the greatest secret is not how they were built. It is why they were built to last forever. And what the builders expected would happen to the rest of the world when they were gone. All over the planet, new discoveries are showing how much of our history still lies buried. What we once called empty wilderness is starting to look like something else entirely. With LiDAR, radar, and satellite mapping, scientists are realizing that the monuments we already know, from Gunung Padang to Giza to Teotihuacan, might be only a fraction of what is truly out there. Forests, deserts, mud plains, and even ice fields are revealing traces of intelligent design that stayed hidden for centuries, sometimes for thousands of years. And the most unsettling part is this. Most of these places did not disappear because someone destroyed them. They disappeared because Earth buried them. For a long time, archaeology was forced to work like a person searching a dark room with a candle. Slow steps, narrow vision, many guesses. One excavation could take years, and most of the planet was simply too vast to examine. But now the candle has become a floodlight. Technology is sweeping across the world and exposing shapes that nature rarely makes by accident. Straight lines, perfect grids, symmetrical platforms, monumental mounds that follow geometry instead of terrain. The more we scan, the more it feels like our map of ancient civilization was never finished. It was barely started. In South America, the Amazon is rewriting the story of humanity itself. For decades, experts insisted that no advanced civilization could have lived there. The logic sounded convincing. The soil was poor, the jungle was dense, and the environment seemed hostile to large-scale urban life. At most, they argued, there could have been small settlements scattered along rivers. Then LiDAR scanned beneath the canopy, and the jungle began to confess. Under the trees, Researchers found geometric layouts that stretched across huge areas: square grids, raised causeways, circular plazas, defensive ditches, stepped mounds and platform complexes that look like planned ceremonial centers. Some patterns repeat over long distances, suggesting networks of communities rather than isolated villages. What looked like endless green wilderness turned out to be a kind of camouflage, hiding the remains of organized societies whose footprints were still there, just covered. It is difficult to explain how powerful this is unless you imagine the scale. A person can walk through that jungle and see nothing but trees. But the lasers see through the leaves. They reveal what the human eye cannot. And once those shapes appear, you cannot unsee them. The Amazon stops being a blank space on the ancient map. It becomes a crowded chapter that was simply erased from view. Further north, in Guatemala and southern Mexico, the story becomes even more dramatic. Here the Maya were already known. Their temples, cities, and calendar systems have fascinated the world for centuries. But even in this famous region, the true scale of what existed was underestimated. LIDAR changed that overnight. Beneath vegetation, researchers mapped hundreds of thousands of buried structures. Not dozens, not hundreds, hundreds of thousands. Homes, terraces, reservoirs, roads, canals, platforms, defensive walls, and pyramids. The scans revealed that Maya cities were not isolated islands of civilization surrounded by empty jungle. They were connected. Causeways linked regions into networks. Agricultural engineering reshaped terrain. Water systems managed seasonal extremes. City planning extended far beyond what had been visible from the ground. The ancient landscape was engineered, designed to support large populations and complex society. And once again, the pyramid appears, not as a rare monument, but as a repeating blueprint. A well-established design used across a civilization that was far larger than most textbooks ever admitted. Now shift to the Andes. The Andes tell the same story, but in a different way. Here, mountains break the land into hard boundaries. Earthquakes reshape valleys. Volcanoes bury what humans build. Landslides can erase entire settlements in minutes. In this region, many ancient sites have been discovered by accident, not by planned excavation. A road project cuts into a hillside and exposes stone foundations. A quake cracks the ground and reveals a buried wall. A storm strips soil away, and suddenly stairs appear where no one knew they existed. And the shock is not only that new sites keep surfacing, it is that they are everywhere. Once you start seeing the pattern, you begin to suspect entire mountain corridors were filled with engineered stone, terraces, ceremonial platforms, and pyramid-like complexes that were later swallowed by geology. In some places, nature does not just ruin monuments, nature stores them. It packs them under layers like a sealed archive. Then there is the desert story, which is equally chilling, because deserts do not only preserve, deserts hide. The Sahara offers one of the strongest examples. Today it looks like endless sand, a hostile sea of dunes. But long ago, the Sahara was not this. It went through wetter periods when rivers flowed, lakes existed, and vegetation spread across wide regions. People lived there. Communities formed. Trade routes moved through what is now empty desert. Radar mapping beneath dunes has revealed grid-like outlines and buried foundations stretching over distances that suggest organized settlement. Not every detection is confirmed. Some might be natural patterns. Some may be misread. But enough structured shapes appear that the question becomes unavoidable. If the Sahara once supported life, how much civilization did it support? And how much was swallowed by sand when the climate changed? The Sinai Peninsula shows a similar effect. Storms sometimes strip sand away and expose ruins, only for the wind to bury them again. It feels almost alive, like the desert is breathing, revealing and hiding the same structures in a cycle. Nature is not deleting these places. Nature is disguising them. Now we reach the edge of the world, and the mystery becomes colder. In Antarctica, pyramid-shaped formations near the Ellsworth Mountains have stirred debate for years. The official explanation is that they are natural peaks shaped by glaciers, and that is completely possible. Ice can carve sharp symmetry. Wind can sculpt faces. Geological processes can create forms that look artificial when seen from certain angles. But even if they are natural, their existence forces a powerful thought. If ice can hide continents, it can hide history. During the last ice age, massive ice sheets covered regions that are now habitable. Sea levels were lower. The coastlines were different. Vast areas that are now underwater were once exposed land. Human migration patterns could have been completely different. Settlements that were built along ancient coastlines might now be drowned, far beyond the reach of traditional archaeology. So whether Antarctica holds man-made structures or not, It acts like a symbol, a reminder that our planet has storage rooms we have barely opened. Under ice, under dunes, under the jungle, under mud, under volcanic rock. Step back far enough, and a bigger picture begins to form. Earth is not a map with just a few scattered wonders. It is covered with them. Natural disasters like floods, quakes, and storms have not erased civilization completely. They have buried it. Gunung Padang was sealed beneath volcanic layers. Caral was buried under sand and time. El Mirador disappeared into the jungle so completely that its largest pyramid looks like a forested hill. In many places, the most important ancient structures are not visible because nature turned them into landscape, which leads to a haunting thought. Maybe the history we know is only the part that survived above ground. The rest, the earliest chapters, might still be underground, waiting. This is where the repeating patterns become important. Across the world, we keep finding the same signatures. Triangular forms, stepped platforms, long straight roads, cardinal alignment city grids, plazas arranged with geometric logic, sites oriented to cycles of sun and stars. These are not random, they are habits. They are design languages. And if these design languages keep appearing in different continents and time periods, then either humanity repeatedly reinvented the same solutions, or a deeper connection exists that we have not fully traced. This is why the pyramid question refuses to stay local. It is not only Egypt. It is not only Mesoamerica. It is not only Indonesia. The pyramid is appearing as a repeated answer to a repeated human need. But what do I need? Preservation is one possibility. A pyramid is stable. A stepped platform endures. Monumental stone survives flood and erosion better than wood and mud brick. If you wanted to leave something behind that could outlast catastrophe, you would choose a shape like this. Another possibility is communication. Geometry does not need translation. A right angle is universal. A circle is universal. Ratios exist whether we name them or not. If you wanted to pass knowledge forward through time, you could embed it into dimensions, orientation, and structure. And that leads to the most unsettling possibility. Maybe the repeating patterns we keep finding are not simply architecture. Maybe they are a kind of message, a global echo, a network of monuments that once spanned the Earth more completely than we can currently see. If that sounds dramatic, consider what technology is doing right now. Archaeology used to move slowly because digging is slow. Permits take time. Funding takes time. Excavations are expensive and limited, but remote sensing changes everything. Now LiDAR can reveal hidden structures without cutting a single tree. Radar can suggest buried walls beneath sand. Satellites can detect unnatural shapes across huge regions. Ground-penetrating surveys can hint at tunnels and voids under plains where no one suspected anything existed. And the pace is accelerating. Each month brings new revelations. Perfect shapes, straight lines that defy the landscape, voids beneath ground that hint at chambers and buried complexes. Many of these findings are not wild guesses. They come from datasets that can be verified and revisited. Some are published in research. Some are open to analysis. Some are still being debated, but the trend is unmistakable. The planet is giving up secrets. In the Amazon, LiDAR has revealed sprawling lost cities, interconnected towns, causeways, and platform mounds hidden beneath trees. In Guatemala, the same methods revealed vast Maya road systems and canal networks that transform how we understand their civilization. In Saudi Arabia, satellite surveys have identified thousands of stone formations nicknamed gates and kites, some believed to be extremely old and tied to early human landscape engineering. In Peru, new scanning and mapping have continued to expand what is known around the Nazca region, suggesting that what we see on the surface is only a small portion of the full story. And that is the key point. What we see on the surface may be only the surface. There is more below, much more. For the first time in history, discovery is not limited to official expeditions. Independent researchers can analyze satellite images from their computers. Drone mapping has become accessible. Open-source tools allow curious minds to explore terrain patterns that would have taken decades to study in the past. This does not mean every claim is true. It does not mean every shape is a lost city. But it does mean the gate has opened. The ground is no longer silent. Archaeology is no longer only a slow process controlled by a few institutions. It is unfolding live in real time as technology expands the search. And every major discovery keeps pointing to the same truth. Our civilization's story is older, deeper, and more interconnected than most people were ever taught. But these findings also raise a question that technology alone cannot answer. If these buried pyramids and lost cities truly belong to ancient forgotten worlds, How did their builders achieve what they did? How did they coordinate massive labor without modern communication? How did they align structures with the sky so consistently? How did they shape stone with such precision in certain places? How did they design cities on a scale that rivals much later civilizations? At this point, you begin to realize something important. We are not only digging up the past anymore, we are reading it. We are learning to read Earth like a layered book. Each scan reveals a faint sentence. Each buried wall becomes a clue. Each hidden grid becomes a paragraph. And when enough paragraphs appear, they begin to form a narrative that is both thrilling and disturbing, because the narrative suggests that human history did not begin once. It may have begun, risen, collapsed, and begun again. If that is true, then the monuments we call mysteries are not just achievements, they are survivors. They are what remains after nature resets the board. Floods, quakes, and climate shifts do not need to destroy everything. They only need to cover enough of it that the next civilization forgets what came before. And if the survivors of earlier ages tried to preserve knowledge, they would have built it into forms that endure: stone, geometry, alignment, monuments that could not be burned and could not be erased easily, only buried. So now the Forbidden Fathoms question becomes sharp. Are these monumental works the result of shared human genius that keeps rediscovering the same truths? Or are they echoes of a civilization that existed long before recorded history? A lost chapter whose fragments are now reappearing as the ground is scanned and decoded. Either answer is extraordinary, and the fact that we have to ask the question at all tells you how much we have not yet found. Because for every pyramid we can name, there may be dozens that remain hidden. For every city we have mapped, there may be hundreds still sealed, and somewhere beneath jungle roots, under sand waves, beneath mud plains, or under ice that has not melted in tens of thousands of years, there could be structures that would force the world to rewrite the timeline completely. So what do you think? Were these monumental works the result of shared human genius, or are they echoes of a civilization that existed long before recorded history? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one, and if you want to uncover more, tap the video on screen for our full breakdown on who might have really built the pyramids. Make sure to subscribe for more deep explorations into the hidden truths of our world. Until next time.